Today marks the birthday and nationally recognizes holiday of United Farm Workers founder and farm labor organizing champion Cesar Chavez. This evening, starting at the top of this hour until 8 p.m., KBOO will be airing Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta speeches from our archives, as well as from those of sister stations across the country. Stay tuned as we celebrate farm laborers and the wave Chavez and UWF made in the labor movement as a whole. First, we'll be heading back to May of 1974 when Cesar Chavez spoke at Reed College in the midst of a huelga, or boycott, of Gallo Wine Company, as well as Oregon-grown grapes and lettuce. At the beginning of the lecture, you'll notice Jose Romero call attention to the institution of Reed College and the state of Oregon at large for ignoring the boycott by purchasing, quote, scab lettuce, in spite of the exploitation of farm laborers.
Can everybody hear me back there? Yeah? Okay. Bienvenidos, estudiantes, facultad, comunidad. Wait a minute. We're not at Colegio Cesar Chavez. I forgot. That's where we were this afternoon. And I guess to begin the program, let me introduce myself. My name is Jose Romero. I'm a staff member at Colegio Cesar Chavez, down the road from here, formerly Mount Angel College. I'm kind of a surprise MC here this evening. I came yesterday to make the final arrangements for Cesar, who was coming to visit us this afternoon, and they said, you know, here it is, so take it, and I'm going to do the best I can with it. But let me say first of all that for me, it's an honor and a privilege to be here this evening. It's something that is new for me, that I've never really had a chance to do, particularly with a man such as the one we're having here this evening. So to begin the program, first of all, I'd like to thank the Rite of Spring for the pre-program entertainment, and I think they did a wonderful job, and I'd like to have you give an applause. Yeah, I was just talking to Cesar a minute ago, and I was asking him how he felt. I got a chance yesterday to see his itinerary, flying in late last night from Vancouver, arriving in the wee hours, getting up at the crack of dawn to be at a breakfast, to be at a meeting, to be at a press conference, to be in a TV program, at a luncheon, driving to Mount Angel, where we practically kidnapped him. He was just, the idol of the crowd there. The raza was there in force, just like I see you are all here this evening as well. I think you're in for a... There you go. Hello, Omar. And we have some here as well. But let me begin the evening by by introducing our first speaker. And in this case, it's Paul Bigman, who is a Democratic candidate for the State District, representative for the State District 12. He'd like to talk to us shortly about a move against scab lettuce at all the Oregon colleges. Not all of them have gotten it off the campus. Some have. I was in Eugene last Sunday, and Lane Community College, its board passed, and I'm hoping Reed and other colleges will do the same as well. But I'll pass it on to Paul Bigman, I'm sorry.
First of all, in a brief defense of Reed College, the hosts here, I'd like to tell everyone here who doesn't know that earlier this year, the Reed College student body held a referendum on whether or not there should be scab lettuce in the dining hall here. They voted by a substantial margin that there should not be, and there is no scab lettuce served at this school. And I think that's particularly significant because in a lot of universities there's a talk about neutrality. And there's a kind of a cockeyed idea that it's neutral to support the status quo, whatever it is. And that's what's happening down at University of Oregon right now. As probably most of you know, there's a rather intense struggle to get the university to stop serving scab lettuce and scab grapes. The president of the college says that they must remain non-political. And what he means by non-political is that they'll support the bosses, they'll support Gallo, they'll support Safeway, but they won't support the workers. They won't support the workers in California in the same way that an employer like the state of Oregon or a college won't support the workers in their own institutions. This coming, let me grab a note and make sure I've got the date right. This coming Tuesday, at 9 o'clock, the State Board of Education is going to be meeting at Portland State in Smith Center, room 338. You're meeting at 9 o'clock on. One of the things they're going to be discussing is whether or not the state should maintain this pro-boss neutrality, or whether they should, since they're going to be coming out of one side or the other, support the workers. Now, this isn't a call for a mass demonstration, but I think it would be good if a lot of people went there and let the State Board of Education know that we view an injury to one as an injury to all. That when Safeway and Gallo oppress the workers, the farm workers in California, it hurts us. It hurts us in the same way as if it was happening to us, because it could happen to us. I'd like to ask all of you to go there and quietly, peacefully, politely make it clear that we want the state of Oregon to get out of the business of being a scab. Viva la huelga!
My apologies to read. I noticed one thing, and I'm comparing, but today somebody yelled, "Viva la huelga!" And I know that all of us here are fellow table grape boycotters, fellow head lettuce grape boycotters, and fellow Gallo Wine boycotters. But somehow the applause that was just generated for Brother Bigman here was kind of commercial. It was a courtesy, but it's not quite the type that I've seen in previous rallies, especially where Cesar is there. And I thought, as part of the organizing effort here, that maybe we could do something to that effect. Kind of, well, let's begin first of all by the hand clap that Luis Valdez introduced to the farm labor movements on the back. And it goes like this. If you'll all join me, and we'll get the hang of it real quick, like I'm sure. So if you will, just watch me or join me. Go. Okay, yeah. All right, yeah, okay. Sí se puede. Right on. Sí se puede. Okay, that's kind of, now, one additional thing now. I said already what you were, but kind of as a test, if you can respond, what are we boycotting? You can repeat grapes. What else? Lettuce. What else? Gallo wine. And I'd like to really hear you join in on this. And, kind of repeat after me. Is that what I was going to say? Okay, so what are we boycotting? Really, what are we boycotting? That's right. What else? Scab. What else? Sí se puede. Right. Okay, now I think hands are burning. Okay, our next speaker is Wally Priestley. Wally is the incumbent for District 16. A little background on Wally. He's been involved with the farm labor movement since the mid-60s. 1967, I think he was incarcerated and took an active hand in the boycott movement. And Wally, in turn, will introduce Cesar. So let's hear it for Wally, okay?
Thank you, Senior Romero. It's a tremendous honor for me to introduce Cesar tonight. I thought prior to that, I've heard Cesar speak how the strength of the Farm Workers Union is in the boycott. And I thought when I was called upon to have the honor of introducing Cesar that of all of those around Portland here that have been so much more active than have I, Lois Stranahan in 1965, I remember well, she taught me how to picket the S&W Fine Foods and Tree Sweet Juices. The present boycott leaders now off their volunteer status. And I didn't think you'd applause, but I want to mention Mel and Kathy Huey, Kate Barton, the former leader, Carolyn Eckel, Pete Tuno, the Halverson family, State Representative Howard Willits, Julia Rudela, Hank and Martino Curl, Art Perlow, Russ Farrell, and I know there was a lot of members of the Socialist Workers' Parties that have of late been very active with the Farm Workers Union. Would they all stand, please? Anyone who's been on the picket line, just briefly? Would the picketers just stand briefly so we can honor them? I would like to... Thank you so much. I think we come here, when we come and support the Farm Workers Union, apart from the struggle of the farm workers, which we're all concerned about, I think we do indeed honor Cesar Chavez for the kind of person that he is. He's a great teacher. Many of us would like to be like him. I was at a meeting about 3-4 years ago, and Cesar was speaking Spanish to people in Hubbard, and my friend Priscilla understands Spanish, and I was quite amazed, as was she, that Cesar was speaking some 3-4 years ago in Hubbard, Oregon, to a group of Chicano farm workers, and he spoke about the rights of women. And it was quite touching because, you know, the women's movement is an important thing as well. And it does speak to the kind of person, the real gentleman that Cesar is, and what he supports in nonviolence. And with that, I would like to introduce Cesar Chavez.
Thank you very much, Brother Priestley. We want to thank Brother Jose Romero, Brother Paul Bigman. We want to thank the sponsors here of the meeting tonight, the Reed United Farm Workers Support Committee, the Reed College Public Affairs Board, Mel and Kathy Huey, all the people who worked so hard this last week and a half to make this day here in Portland for us meaningful and full of activity. We want to thank Lois and Jess Stranahan. We were their guests a little while ago at their home. We rested there and had dinner. And we want to thank very especially Lisa Hirsch, who we called, gave her about 8 days notice, telling her we'd be here today, and we wanted her to get an agenda and to cover the whole day for today. So if Liza would like to stand so we can applaud and thank her for the work she did. We also want to thank very, very much the Rite of Spring for the entertainment, the music before the start of the rally. And brothers and sisters, we want to thank all of you for being here this evening. As you know, we're traveling throughout the country seeking support for the boycott of grapes, lettuce, and Gallo wines. We recently toured the state of Ohio and, well, the states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, parts of Oregon early this week, into Washington, over to Canada, and back here today, and tomorrow we're in San Francisco. But everywhere we've been, we see tremendous support for the boycott. We see that we have more support now than even at the height of the great boycott in 1970 when we won the first contracts. And I think that that says an awful lot It says an awful lot for people who are concerned about justice and freedom, and it says an awful lot about people. We wanted to tell you that the lettuce we're boycotting is the Western Iceberg Head lettuce. Western Iceberg Head lettuce. It's an awful long name for a small lettuce. It's hard to describe what the lettuce looks like, except to say that it's the only lettuce that looks like a lettuce. And that there are many other, no less than 8 or 10 different varieties that you could eat, except the iceberg head lettuce, Western iceberg head lettuce. That one we would appreciate very much if you don't eat it. Now, there's one company that has a contract with the Farm Workers Union that harvests and sells Western iceberg head lettuce. But that company wraps its lettuce, and each head of lettuce is wrapped individually, and each wrapper has the union emblem on it. So you can't miss it. But let me tell you a little bit about lettuce. Lettuce being such the part of the American diet that before you know it, it's right there on the plate. It's a sneaky vegetable. And we have to, so I like to warn you and tell you what happens to me when I go to a place to be served food, and we say, well, first of all, today we had a group of labor leaders, and one of them came up and he told me he was in a meeting in Washington, D.C. not over a week ago. He says, they serve that damn lettuce, he says, and none of us ate the lettuce. So I thanked him, and I told him that was really, that was great, but that although it was a great gesture, it didn't really help the boycott. So I wanted to explain to him that the trick is to make sure that the lettuce doesn't get in the plate in the first place. Because once it gets put in the plate, you're paying for it, even though you don't eat it. And you're consuming lettuce even though it goes to the garbage after you get through with it. And the best way to do it then is to, before you're served, please tell whomever is serving you, taking your order, hold the lettuce. And be prepared, because the lettuce will be on the plate, even though you've told them not to do it. Then when the lettuce comes, you have to tell them, what I do, I tell them that I'm not eating lettuce because I'm supporting the farm workers movement. And then if they don't understand that and they say, well, what's that? And we say, well, we explain what it is. And if still they don't really catch it, we say, besides, we don't want to eat the lettuce because it's full of pesticides. Then they know. Then they pay attention. On the lettuce is a little different, because you see, rather on the grapes are a little different. It's a little more difficult to boycott grapes these days. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get the vines to produce eagles on grapes. And so because of that, we have to then, well, you know what it is. You go to the store today, grapes will be coming, incidentally, will be here in your stores by about the first week in June. And you'll ask the clerk at the store if those grapes are union, and most likely, without thinking, he'll say, yes, they're union. Then you say, well, if they're union, and if you want to support the farm worker boycott, then you will say, well, let me look at the boxes where the grape came in. And then he won't know what to do, but you'll then ask him that you want to go in the back of the store, into the cold storage, and look at the boxes. And then, once you go to the back in the cold storage, you will see maybe one box with a union label, and then you'll have to figure out how all the grapes out on the counter could possibly fit in that little box. And then by that time, he won't be able to answer you, and it just such a hassle that you may decide not to eat grapes at all, which would be a lot simpler. We have one contract with the table grapes, and he's going to pack around 500,000 boxes, but he's got them sold. He's got them sold since 2 months ago, even though they haven't been picked yet. So don't worry about if you don't eat grapes, you won't support us. You will. Now we get into Gallo wines, and that's very complicated. First of all, as you may know, Gallo is the largest wine producer in the country, in the world. We're told last year Gallo netted $44 million before tax. They spent $6.5 million in advertising. This year they're spending $13 million. They spend more money than Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola put together. Gallo wines, some labels have the name Gallo on the label and some don't. And so there's two ways to know if you're drinking Gallo wine. One is a relatively easy way, the other one is a little harder. The first way is that if you see the wine and you're curious and you don't see the name Gallo anywhere on the label, then look in the fine print, and if you see the word Modesto, California, that's Gallo, because that's the only winery in Modesto, California. Now, before I tell you the second way to tell if you're drinking Gallo wine, I'd like to I know that a lot of these wines here you're totally unfamiliar with, but I like to read the names just in case. Boone's Farms, Tyrola, Jug Wines, Spagnata, Red Mountain, Andre Cold Duck, Ripple. You won't believe this, but there's a button around here with a picture of President Nixon, says Nixon drinks Ripple. That's something. The second way to tell if you're drinking Gallo wine, drink the darn stuff. If you get sick, that's Gallo. Brothers and sisters, what the Teamsters done to the Farm Workers Union is resented by everyone, but particularly the men and women and children who fought so hard to build a union, an instrument for social change, their own instrument created by their own struggle, tears and blood and jailings, and the help of millions of Americans throughout the country from 1965 through 1970 to win those first contracts, establish the first union, and destroy the myth that workers could not organize, and end a battle that started even before the turn of the century. For 85 years, workers have been struggling to have a union, and every single time they've been beaten back. The Wobblies tried it, and they were beaten back. And then different unions with different political ideologies tried it. The communists tried it, and the socialists and others, and they were beaten back. And then the straight unions tried it, and they were beaten back. The CIO tried to organize farm workers, and they did not succeed. And then the FLL tried it, and then the FL-CIO, when they merged, tried it. And then all of the ethnic groups tried to build unions. There's a whole history of struggle by ethnic people. The blacks, the Chicanos, the Filipinos, the Chinese, the Japanese. The Chinese were the American Indians were the first farm workers. When you read all in your history books about all the uprisings, there were strikes. There were no uprisings. They were striking for a better wage and for a union, even then. And then the Chinese who were brought here to build the railroads, and when the railroad building was done, Chinese had strange ideas. They dared strike, and they wanted a union, so the agribusiness got very worried and went to Japan and brought large groups of Japanese. And the Japanese had even stranger ideas. They wanted to own the land. And then the Japanese began to own land, and then the Filipinos came. They brought thousands and thousands of young Filipinos. They wouldn't let the wives come, they wouldn't let the women come with them. Sure. And so you see these men now, they're 70, 80 years old, completely abandoned, dying off. They're abandoned in shacks, and they don't even want them in the camps because they can't produce anymore. They're throwing them out. But they tried. The Filipinos put up fantastic fights for unions, and they were beaten back. The Dust Bowlers came, people from Oklahoma and Arkansas, and they tried it, and they were also beaten back. And the blacks tried it, and the Chicanos, and finally the Farm Workers Union came on the scene in 1962, and with the help of just millions of people in the United States and Canada and Western Europe, were able to have a union. And we signed contracts for 3 years. The end of the 3-year contract was last April. We thought when the growers signed the contracts that they had accepted the idea that workers have a right to have their own associations, their own unions, their own instruments for economic freedom. But we found out since then that no sooner they had signed the contract in 1970, when they were making deals to see how, when the contracts expired in 73, to see how they would throw the union out. In April last year, when the contracts expired, to give you an example, on April the 15th last year, in Coachella Valley, one of the several valleys where we had contracts, we had 34 contracts. Every single grape grower in Coachella Valley was under contract to our union, and we represented 6,500 workers there. On April the 16th, a day later, the Teamsters had 32 contracts, and we had 2. How could it be when there had been no elections? The workers didn't know anything about the Teamsters Union, never seen an organizer out in the fields. All they knew was that on the 16th in the morning when they went to work, they were told by the bosses and by the labor contractors and the hiring crew chiefs and so forth, sign this card, you now belong to the Teamsters. And the workers told them to go to hell and struck. And from April the And from April the 16th through August the 22nd, we had probably one of the most unbelievable repressions against the Farm Workers Union. See, a deal had been made before the contracts were taken over. The Teamsters guaranteed the growers that if they signed with them, that the Teamsters would see to it. And let me clarify one thing before I go any further. When I say the Teamsters, I'm not speaking of the rank and file or the Teamsters here in Portland. I don't know them. I do know those Teamsters who are fighting us and trying to destroy our union in California. I speak of them. They're finks. Anyway, when we struck on the 16th of April, you will not believe this, but on the same day, we were issued 65 injunctions, and they used a cute trick to deprive us from picketing. You know, picketing is a guaranteed First Amendment right activity. And the courts find it hard to completely say no picketing. What they do, they say, well, if you have 1,000 people on strike, we'll let you have 1 picket. This way they don't infringe on the Constitution, but they wreck the heck out of your organization. But in this case, they said limited pickets picketing. And to give you an example, the injunction said you can picket across the street from where workers are working. In other words, if the street runs east and west and the workers are on the south side, you can picket on the north side. If the workers are working on the north side, you can picket on the south side. But we soon found out, of course, that there's workers on both sides of the street. And then we couldn't picket because we're in violation of the injunction, which meant we had to give up the strike. One of our attorneys was so upset at this game that he went to the judge and asked the judge if he wanted his injunction obeyed, that he should arrange it so that we could picket like 65 feet up in the air. And so the workers made a decision to break the injunctions, and we broke every damn injunction that was issued against us. And we were arrested. Every single picket was in jail. We had in that short period of time over 5,000 men, women, and children arrested. Over 5,000. This was last year, 1973. There were a group of religious people here from Portland who were in jail 2 weeks alongside the farm workers, nuns and sisters and priests, and others from throughout the country. And so that didn't stop the strike. So then the Teamsters came and brought their goons, recruited the worst of humanity from around the Los Angeles and San Francisco areas, paid them $67.50 a day, and were brought for one purpose, to beat the people and to scare them. That didn't work. Then they began to shoot at people. And as you know, on August the 19th and August the 21st, Naji Dafula, an Arab worker, was killed. And 2 days later, Juan de la Cruz, a Mexican worker, was shot through the heart. The people who were arrested for violating the injunctions, the bail was set at $1,500. The man who shot de la Cruz, murder, his bail was set also at $1,500. We asked people that we should not go out to the fields. We couldn't get the police to disarm the men who were shooting at us from inside the fields. We went after de la Cruz's funeral. We went for 4 hours to try again, and we had 4 shooting incidents in less than an hour. And we pulled everybody in, and we said, we have to do it the Boycott way. We tried from the Justice Department to get people to come there as monitors. We tried to get the Justice Department for the state, Attorney General. We tried everywhere we could to get the law enforcement people to come and look what was happening. And no one came. In Coachella, we took out 97% of the workers who were out on strike, and 2 days later, every single worker was replaced with illegals from Mexico. Men and women in Mexico who are worse off than we are, because that country is having an awful time with its rural economy, and who come here because the only time they can work is when they come break strikes, because that's the only time they'll hire them. And the Immigration Service would not go into the fields to remove them, but those that we organized and got them to join the picket lines, they were picked up immediately. You know, most unions would have been destroyed with this kind of opposition. It would have been the end of them. But our union continues to struggle, and I think it continues to struggle because it's, first of all, it's a people's union. And it lives only because the workers themselves support it, and because they have this tremendous love for this instrument that they're building, that they're willing to make the sacrifice to keep it going. Now those growers in California have tried every single thing. The only thing they hadn't tried, 2 things they hadn't tried. One was to go to the general public for a vote referendum on an election, and the other one had been to just go in, did what they did in 73, take the contracts away from us. In 1972, the growers spent about $1.5 million and put on a referendum petition on the ballot. That was in 1972 in November. And we battled against that referendum, which would have, it passed, would have destroyed the union. Take the right to strike, the right to boycott, all sorts of things taken away from us. So we had to fight hard to defeat that. And we were worried. This is the first time we're going to the public, to all the voters in California. That was on November of '72. Richard Nixon was on the ballot too. And we defeated that injunction, that proposition by almost 60 to 40%. President Nixon was re-elected. He won California. Who would think that a couple of years later both of us would be in a lot of trouble? There is, the boycott is a powerful instrument. Gandhi, who used that instrument well, said that the boycott was one of the most perfect instruments, most near perfect instruments for nonviolent social change. And he had some tremendous boycotts, as you will recall. The salt, the opium, the clothes that were made in England, and so on, and he won all those boycotts. Dr. King started with a boycott, and it was a boycott that gave him the tremendous first victory. We too know about boycotts. This is our 21st boycott. We have won 19 boycotts. One boycott was not concluded because we had to get into this fight. This is the 21st boycott, and we won every single one. The boycott is not really grapes and lettuce and Gallo wine. Boycott is really people. And it works only when you get enough people doing the same thing. And then we couldn't really take credit for the boycotts. We can take credit for the beginning of it. But the boycott begins to build a life of its own. And soon, as we see today, it begins to take a hold. And pretty soon the best we can do is just sort of guide it. But the people carry it on. We have a development that we've seen in past where people began to organize their own boycott committees. We know nothing of it. And when it gets to this stage, we know then that the boycott is going to be successful because people are doing it everywhere. Let me tell you that we've had some amazing stories come out of the boycotts. And I'd like to share with you a couple of them to show you, to try to explain, or at least try to let you know what we have witnessed. Back in 1969, a few months before we won the first boycott, a very close friend of the movement was traveling in Hong Kong. And while walking the streets in Hong Kong, he came upon a scene where there was a man picketing a small fruit stand. And when our supporter first saw the picket sign, he just saw some characters, and he thought that they were Chinese characters, not knowing the language, and didn't pay too much attention except to note that there was somebody picketing there. But as the picket turned around to come across that in front of that store again, there were in big letters in English, "Do not eat California grapes." And so our friend rushed over to him well, he wanted to find out, who was the committee and, his name, but that man didn't speak English. So when he came to see me in California, he wanted me to tell him if that man over there, what was his name and was he in the committee. And I said, I don't even know that we have a picket in Hong Kong. And he wanted me to explain if I didn't know how come it happened. And the only thing I could say was that was the spirit of justice that knows no borders. The spirit of justice that knows no barriers, oceans, mountains, languages, distances. Here in Washington State, I used to visit the federal prisons before I was asked not to do it. They won't let me go in there anymore. But I used to visit the prisons. Although I've never been in prison, I've been in jail many times, and I wanted to be with the prisoners from time to time. And first discovery I made was that in those prisons people work, and there are in those prisons there are industries, and the government makes money from that labor. And I couldn't understand how they pay those prisoners something like 10 cents an hour and room and board. So when I talked to them, I would say that they had to have a union. And of course, the wardens didn't like this. But I was here at McNeil Island visiting. I was a guest of a group of black prisoners. And this is another one of those stories. At lunchtime, we went to the serving line, and among other things, rice pudding was being served. So I was ahead of my guide, a black man. When I got to the rice pudding, I reached out to get a serving of rice pudding, and this black man reached out and grabbed my hand and said, "Don't eat that because there are raisins there." And I was really ashamed. I didn't know. I was embarrassed. I didn't know what to do, and why I should have thought of that. And so we left the serving line and we went to a table. And I said, "Oh my God, here's a young man about 25, black, poor, probably in jail because he didn't have money to defend himself. At least 1,000 miles to where the struggle is taking place, and the people aren't even black there in the grapes and in the lettuce. They're mostly Mexican and Filipino." And this man was so concerned about the boycott that he wasn't taking any chances. He was even boycotting raisins to make sure. And I try to explain that one to myself. You know, here's a man who has everything against him, but the spirit of justice is right in his heart, you know, and he's doing what he can to help others. We had, I was in Michigan not long ago talking to a group of ex-migrant workers, and talking to this woman who told me she couldn't picket because, well, she says, "I just can't walk those picket lines. My legs won't help me. But I know what it is to be a migrant. I was a migrant for 50 years. And after the meeting, she wanted to talk to me, so I went up to her, and she had this very special look in her face, and she came up and she said, "You know, although I can't picket, I do visit the stores very regularly, and when I see those grapes, I reach out there and I get their hands and I send them your special greetings. I get their hands and I squeeze them hard." You know, nonviolence is a powerful weapon. The problem is that in an institution like yours, nonviolence has many problems. Because you see, nonviolence is difficult to deal with when it gets into the iffy questions. Nonviolence, when it's used to bring about social change, but is used in the context of action, it's very powerful. We've read an awful lot about it, but we've been experimenting now for 14 years. You know, we've come to the conclusion that nonviolence sometimes loses because, see, when you embrace nonviolence, that's the easiest thing to do. You're also embracing other things. You're making a commitment in other directions. When you embrace nonviolence, you're saying to yourself, as I embrace we didn't know that when we embraced it, but we found out. As I embrace nonviolence, I'm really putting my fame as an organizer on the line. And if I am not successful, if I fail, it will not be because of nonviolence. It will be because as an organizer, I was inept. So it means that you have to have work discipline, because you see the opposition has the money, and that's their stock in trade. We don't have money, but we have the time. Time is our stock in trade. And it's how you use that time that really counts. And so a work habit, very little rhetoric, but getting the work done. Once you know what has to be done, really, really helps. And you know, you can be nonviolent and lock yourself up in your room and nothing's going to happen. Nonviolence works only when you put it into action, where you go down where the injustice is being committed. Prayer is part of nonviolence. And we believe in prayer, and we pray. Sometimes more than others. But we know that prayer alone is not going to change it. Now, some praying and an awful lot of picketing are going to get things changed. See, last year, the experts were saying, that's the end of the Farm Workers Union. That's the end of it. You can't deal with the growers and with the Teamsters and with the government. That's the end of the Farm Workers Union. We were telling the press, that's not the end. Sure, we don't like what happened to us, and sure, we have to do the work over again, and it's regrettable. But if that's what it takes to have a decent union, a democratic union, a union that's an instrument of the workers and responds to the needs of the workers and is by the workers and of the workers, we will do that work. We have to do it 30 times over. I would like to tell you that nonviolence is also very radical. It is. Let me explain what, see, let me just give you an example. To go without food for a week or 10 days or 20 days or 25 days, that's very radical. You see, fasting, I wish when I'm saying these things that you would be able to understand what I'm trying to say is that nonviolence is not for angels and saints only. Nonviolence is for men and women who want to struggle right here on this earth to change things. Nonviolence is an instrument that can be used by anyone. And so fasting has a tremendous power in itself. We read in history that many years ago, hundreds of years ago, before people could enroll in the universities, you had to undergo a 40-day fast. Next time, if you want to experiment, if you get into a difficult situation or a fight with someone you care for a lot, stop eating. And by the end of the second day, you're so worried about your hunger that you couldn't possibly hate anyone. Brothers and sisters, this is just experiments. We cannot add anything to nonviolence. That the great teacher right in this country not long ago taught us. Dr. King taught us how to do these things. And he learned from Gandhi, and we learned from King and Gandhi. And Christ laid it out so beautifully, so perfectly. You see, it's just like Dr. King came in and started a revolution. It was just the beginning. But an awful lot of sacrifice went into that one, and it's still going into that fight that hasn't ended. We say that nonviolence also demands creativity. And you have to be creative to get yourself out of boxes that you put in by the opposition. You have to be very creative, otherwise then that's the end of it. And violence is looked at as something like a shortcut. I have a friend We work as organizers years ago before we started organizing the Farm Workers Union and many other things. And he came to Delano once in 1968, 67, when it appeared to everybody that we had lost the strike and were just a few of us trying to put up a front. And he argued with me for the most of one night after a general meeting of the workers in Delano. We went to have coffee at a little restaurant, and we argued almost all night, insisting that if we didn't take violent means, we would not win the strike. And we argued back and forth. Finally, about 3:30, close to 4 o'clock in the morning, I told him, "John, you've won. You've convinced me. I can't talk anymore about it because I have to go set up the picket lines. We start picketing at 4:30. I have to be in the office right away. But after the picket lines are set around 10 o'clock, I'd like to meet with you again." So at 10 o'clock in the morning we met, and I suggested we meet in his car because I didn't want to take any chances that the office was bugged. And so we got in the car and I said, "John, you win. I think violence is the only way to do it. I'd like to find out, what do you want, a knife or a gun?" And he was driving and he let the steering go and almost wrecked the car. He says, "Not me, not me." And I said, "Oh, you're one of those that wants to prescribe violence for others?" He was ready to prescribe violence for the farm workers, but he didn't want to take up violence. That's how much he believed in violence. Men who believe in violence never talk about it. Brothers and sisters, the farm workers have been struggling for a long, long time. And they will continue to struggle because, you see, we had just a short taste of what it is to be free, what it is to have a union. That's not everything, it's the beginning of something. But to taste the power and be able to feel, to be able to sit across the table from that employer and negotiate with him, to be able to say, "You can't fire me like before because I stand up." And to come together as workers and not stop only because you got a contract, but begin to develop the whole idea that workers always, once they have a union, the most natural step for them is the most natural step after they have a union is to get themselves involved in politics. In the second year of the contract, we had people running for the water board, people running in some of those rural areas. One farm worker had the audacity to want to be a judge. 2 years later, he was struggling in the picket line. He wanted to be a judge. And I would have liked him to be a judge because I wouldn't mind coming before him. Let me tell you a little bit about who these men, women, and children are. You see, all of us, regardless of our politics, our religion, our race, or what we do, every single day, 3 times a day, unless you're fasting, you come in contact with the labor of those people, men, women, and children. You sit at a table to eat grapes, I hope not, fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, dairy products, meat. That didn't just come and appeared at the store and you bought it there and brought it to your table. Someone had to do a lot of work before the fruits were harvested and the vegetables were planted. And these men, women, and children who for so many years have been asked by society to travel the length and the width of this country, they're in Florida, they're mostly black, in the Southwest, mostly Mexican. We have membership in Florida. 2 years ago, on one of my visits there, I was asking one of the black farm workers, "Why do you go on these long migrations? You've told me that you go and about 2,000 miles round trip, and when you get back, you're worse off than when you started." He looked at me and he said, "That's what I've been doing for 14 years now, and my father did it before me." And he looked and he said, I said, "Why do you do it? Why do you do it?" And he looked at me and he said, "Well, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? If we don't harvest those vegetables and those fruits, who's going to do it? And then I looked at him and he said, just matter-of-factly, he said, and of course, if we don't harvest that food, what are the people going to eat? Knowing full well that he is starving himself and his family, and still has this understanding about people, caring about people. And you take a Mexican family out of Texas or Mexico, and then they're asked to come to California, to Arizona, California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, back to Texas, and they're in the same boat. And when you ask them, they say pretty much the same thing. And for years now, these men and women and children who represent the statistics, the life expectancy of the average American is 69 years, maybe more now. Farm workers, 49 years. Not only do they exploit us in many ways, but they also take 20 years of our lives because of the miserable conditions. Infant mortality rates 125% higher than the average. Respiratory diseases among migratory workers 300% higher than the average, than the rest of the country. You know that women still have babies in the cars and they're traveling because they haven't got money to go to the hospital and have a child? These men, women, and children are asked to do all these things. And then they willingly crucify themselves in those jobs of short-handled hoe, stoop labor for 12 hours, 10 hours a day, and pay them pittance for their work. And this cycle continues. It never ends. It has never ended. Year in and year out. The great-grandfather did it, the grandfather did it, the father's doing it, the children are going to do it. And perhaps the ironic thing, the worst of everything, how in the world can we ask these people to produce all this food to feed you and me, the rest of the country, and there's enough food to export, and yet the same people who with their sweat and their sacrifices produce this food go hungry? Brothers and sisters, those of us who struggle in this particular struggle, there are many struggles. We have the farm worker struggle as one of them. We just can't stop. We cannot stop until such time as these men are given an instrument so they can take care of themselves like all the workers have done. And it's to this end that we appeal to you. I think if the workers were here, they could express it well tonight by saying, as we feed you, please help us feed ourselves. Thank you very much.
¡Sí se puede! ¡Que viva la huelga! ¡Que viva Cesar Chavez! ¡Sí se puede!
That was Cesar Chavez speaking at Reed College here in Portland in 1974 in the midst of a boycott on grapes, wine, and lettuce. This speech was recorded and originally broadcast by KBOO thanks to the efforts of Marlene Smith. You're listening to a block of special KBOO programming to acknowledge Cesar Chavez Day. This is KBOO 90.7 FM.
KBOO Community Radio is a proud co-sponsor of the Native Wisdom Films Festival on Saturday, April 15th, starting at 2 p.m. at the Northwest Film Center in Portland. The Native Wisdom Films Festival features 4 recent films directed by Lawrence Johnson: The People of the Caribou, The People of the Oregon Coast, The People of the Well, and The People of the Oregon Interior. Accompanying the films is a selection of shorts made by students in the Wisdom's Native Film Academy. Again, That's the Native Wisdom Films Festival, Saturday, April 15th, starting at 2 p.m. at the Northwest Film Center, Whistle Auditorium, 1219 Southwest Park Avenue in Portland. More information can be found at KBOO.FM on the right side of the homepage under Community Events.
KBOO Community Radio is a proud co-sponsor of Thirsty City, a monthly beat and rap night at the No in Portland. On Saturday, April 1st, Thirsty City hosts Los Angeles-based Future Funk aficionados Devin Hu and Zachy Force, along with Thodo Lane and Wood Ox. The homie Northern Draw will also be DJing. Again, that's Thirsty City at the No, 3728 Northeast Sandy Boulevard in Portland. This is a 21 and up thing, so don't bring your kids. More information can be found at KBOO.FM on the right side of the homepage under Community Events.
Up next from the KBOO archives, we bring you another historic speech from Cesar Chavez, recorded at Lewis and Clark on April 11th, 1991, wherein he spoke regarding the farm labor organizing efforts undertaken to ban DDT and other pesticides in the U.S.
I readily welcome to Lewis and Clark College and introduce to all of you Mr. Cesar Chavez.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. We wish to thank Megan Voorhees in a very special way for all the work that's done to make the appearance here possible today. And also like to thank all of the sponsors and of course all of you good people for being here with me this afternoon. We also have along with Ramon Ramirez from PECUM, we also have some other board members of that organization and also some members of the group. And we want to take this opportunity to congratulate them and thank them and wish them good success in the continuing work to liberate the farm workers here in the state of Oregon. The video, The Wrath of Grapes, can be had free at the outside the auditorium or the chapel here for the asking. We'd like very much to have you take a video and show it to your class, your church organization, your union meeting, or your family to let them know what farm workers, grape workers in California are confronted with in terms of the pesticide problems that they're facing. That would be, if you care to help us, that would be probably the best way and the quickest way to help us. We're here today to ask you to join the California Table Grape Boycott. We ask you to not eat and buy the red grape and the green grape and the black grape, and also not to eat or buy the grapes with seeds and the seedless grapes. And in fact, we're asking you to don't buy anything that looks like a grape, just to be sure. The issue of toxics and pesticides in the public policy arena are very difficult to deal with. We started a campaign against the impact of pesticides on farm workers back in the late 50s. And since then, we have been to a score of state legislatures and the National Congress to, through public policy, establish legislation to protect these workers and their families. And for all these years, we have never even come close to getting the real protection that they deserve and they must have and that they need. And we pretty much decided that public policy for a group such as ours, which is to begin with a minority, in fact we're minority sometimes 3 times over, we don't have the votes, neither do we have the votes at the state legislature in California, nor do we have the votes in Oregon or Washington or any other state, and much less so in the state in the U.S. Congress. And so we found another way to deal with the issue. In 1965, before the great boycott and strike and boycott of that crop, we had asked the California table grape growers to cease the use of DDT and all of the related poisons because of the impact on the workforce. And we were told, pretty much what we're told today, that they could not begin to stop using DDT because without DDT, they could not hope to grow even one grape. It was in the period during the time when most Americans thought that DDT was a saving grace. And in fact, many people thought without DDT, we would have instant famine. And so it was very difficult. But we were out there advocating the banning, the restriction of those pesticides. And because of the boycott that started in '65 and finally ended in the summer of 1970, for the first time and only time, over 1,000 growers in California that grow table grapes came forth and signed a labor agreement where they, in that agreement, signed a clause not using DDT, DDE, aldrin, dealdrin, and all the related poisons. And we banned DDT because of that boycott and that strike 2 years before our own government finally banned DDT. It was a pesticide that should have never been used in the first place. And then, for the next 20-some years, even though DDT was banned, we continue manufacturing DDT here and selling it to the underdeveloped countries, particularly and especially Mexico and India. It wasn't until about 3 or 4 years ago that we finally closed the last DDT plant in the United States. And it is a case then of other pesticides. And so what I tell you is that through public policy, which is so much a part of the American mentality, we have gotten very little. But it's been through public action where we've been able to go to you, the American consumer, our court of last resort, and through you we've been able to make some significant changes for the betterment of these workers at the marketplace. And so, when we come here before you today to ask you to join our public action, once again, for the 3rd time, to boycott grapes, we know well that this is the only and the best way for us to bring about a resolution of the organophosphates, those pesticides that are wreaking havoc with our families, the children, and the workforce. And we need your help as we've done it before, because only the American consumer has been the only one that's ever been responsible enough to respond to our plea, because the politicians, by and large, with few exceptions, have never responded. Another problem that we have in the public policy arena is when there's a debate on pesticides, a debate on toxics, as many of our friends in the environmental struggle know, is that we are pretty quickly confronted with the risk-benefit issue that many politicians believe that there have to be risks by the population
to be able to have benefits for the polluters. And that without risk for the population, there cannot be any benefits for the polluters. And then, my friends, that's where we say, that's where we draw the line. To give you an example, you and I know what clean air is. Instinctively, we know. Last year, the U.S. Senate, in a debate on clean air, changed it. Like only politicians can do. And they came and said, clean air henceforth will be any time when there's less than one cancer for every 10,000 population. Well, we know that's not clean air. That's a lot of hot air. And you see, every time that we go before the legislative bodies, we get immediately caught in the risk-benefit issue, and nothing really happens. I will talk later on a little bit more about my views on this issue, and also the difference between public policy and public action, and how we distinguish that and how we've been successful. In the video, you saw the reference to cancer clusters. Cancer clusters have become, in California, very technical issues. A lot of debate. Cancer clusters attract a lot of attention, like most issues, but nothing happens. But while those cancer clusters are very technical and there's a lot of debate around them, the victims are very real, very human, and very defenseless. Little children, mostly between the ages of 4 and 12, who in McFarland, California, as you saw in the video, have cancer at a rate of 800% higher than the national average. And then 14 miles north of McFarland on Highway 99, in a little community, smaller community still, in Early Mart, for the same age group, the children there are experiencing 1,200% cancer higher than the national average. And just now, within the last 2 weeks, we've had several deaths in Delano, California, where the union was born. There are now also deaths in those small communities around the general area. And we're now starting the painful and long and tedious process of proving that there are also cancer clusters there. And to do that, we must not only do the research and have the evidence, but then we got to make the state agencies, who are great apologists, to force them to look at the evidence and then declare these also cancer clusters. So we have a big task ahead of us. Pesticides are everywhere. They're in the fields, in the streets, in the schoolyards, in the courtyards. They're in the soil, the air, the water. Everything's contaminated. And no wonder we're experiencing the devastation with cancer, and we have the highest rate of birth defects in those areas. We have many. We estimate 80% of the workforce has been affected by pesticides in one way or another, anywhere from a minor skin irritation all the way to death and in between. And that's got to stop. We cannot continue that, and we cannot continue that 1 minute longer. We selected 6 years ago in this campaign 5 pesticides although there are many more, but we selected 5 to make a statement on those 5 because we thought these were some of the most dangerous ones, All of these were either teratogens, birth defect causing, or cancer causing pesticides. Parathion, ethyl parathion, phosphrin, Dynaseb, Cap-10, and methyl bromide. And the first demands that we made in our communications with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, everything we claim in those letters to them that we suspected were denied. What has happened since then? Some tunes have changed. Just last week, the EPA made a statement in the public press stating that they have to take a hard look at ethyl parathion because maybe it should be banned after over 100 deaths and thousands of poisonings and God knows how many cancers and birth defects. Also, in the issue of Cap-10, a fungicide that is widely used, we made a demand and we have a letter from EPA saying Cap-10 is perfectly okay. There is residue of Cap-10 in grapes, but it's below the tolerance level so that consumers are safe and workers are also safe. And we say, how can they be? They cannot be. And let me give you an example. The biggest argument that the supermarket industry has against us when we approach them to stop selling the grapes in the boycott, they say, invariably they say, we don't have to worry about the residue, the pesticide residue in grapes, because the government says it's okay. The government says it's okay. And I know, and you should know that everything the government says is not okay, and especially on pesticides. Let me give you an example. In the Western European countries, for the last 20-some years, there's been a tolerance level set for Cap-10 at 5 parts per million, and in some cases 10 parts per million as the highest acceptable level. In West Germany, Cap-10 has been banned now for about 4 years. In Canada, our neighbor to the north, the tolerance level is set at 5 parts per million. There's been great debate for several years trying to do away with Cap-10, the fungicide. When we test grapes for Cap-10 residue, we find minimally 10 parts per million, oftentimes 15, 16, 26, as much as 39 parts per million. What has the EPA done with Cap-10? They have set the tolerance level for Cap-10 at 50 parts per million. Because if they were to set it at 5 or even 10 parts per million, it would be illegal to be used. Now, that's our government, and that's how we're being protected. Those are the risks we have to take because, you know, there has to be also benefits for the other side. And so, under a lot of pressure from our campaign and many other groups in the country, EPA 2 years ago made a big announcement. They were banning or restricting the use of Cap-10, and they restricted the use of Cap-10 in 39 crops. And we thought, wow, gee, that's quite a great success. 39 crops that used less than 5% of all the Cap-10 used in the United States. And the 2 crops that used 95% or more, grapes and grains, it was not restricted. How can that be? I'm asking you because I don't know. I have a lot of suspicions, but I don't know. And you see, to try and deal with the governmental agencies and through legislation and through public policy, we have not been very successful. We're not the only ones now being sprayed with pesticides. Some years ago, in Northern California, there was discovered a Mediterranean fruit fly. And the moment that it was found, every business hit the streets, and the press and the legislature, and they ordered spray anywhere and everywhere and any time, as much as you need to eradicate the Mediterranean fruit fly. It's still with us and it's growing. Now it's in Southern California in the Los Angeles basin, and there now millions of people have been sprayed. Millions. Now, when they first made the announcement, the Department of Health and Agriculture in California, made out some statements saying, malathion is perfectly safe. Although there's been cases where malathion will peel the paint off cars, it's still safe for human beings. And they also said there would be no exceptions. If we find a Mediterranean fly or we suspect a fly, we'll spray first and ask questions later. And so it was in Pasadena. In Pasadena, they didn't find any fruit flies within the city limits, but adjacent to the city limits, they found some Mediterranean fruit flies, and they sprayed Pasadena, and Pasadena went to court and trying to stop the spraying, and they lost the case. So did El Cajon and San Diego and Los Angeles and a number of cities in the basin. Trying to stop the spraying, they've lost their cases in court. So they resorted now to pass local regulations. In Los Angeles, it's illegal to traffic in malathion. Especially, it's illegal to load and unload malathion at the airport. Getting back at the helicopter. So now what happens is that in order to spray Southern California, the helicopters go across the Tehachapi's, where I live in Kern County, in Bakersfield, load up their planes and loads, fly at night, in the dead of night, across the Tehachapi's into the vast Los Angeles basin where millions of people reside, and unload their deadly load and then come back for seconds. They said, the officials in California said, we'll make no exceptions. Well, last year, the Department of the Interior made a request. They want to know if the state of California would relent on its no exceptions and grant an exemption for parts of Riverside County wherein lies an endangered species, almost extinct rat. It's known as the Stevens kangaroo rat. And you know what? They got the exemption. So if you're a rat, you can be safe from being sprayed. If you're a human being, apparently you can't. And then the mad scientists, because they're losing the war, as they are experimenting, because they really don't know what they're doing, or at least if they do, they don't tell us. But from all indications, they really don't know what they're doing. They're going to confuse the little pest, and they're going to get rid of her by the following scheme. They went to the University of Hawaii, and they bred millions of male Mediterranean fruit flies. And once they were of adult age, they were whacked with cobalt 50, and they were sterilized and left half dead. They took them, and then they deposited them in the wild, and the Mediterranean fruit fly, the female, was supposed to mate with that half-dead, sterilized male fly, and that was supposed to be the end of the pest. Well, no sooner that happened, the entomologist found out that the female fly was having no part of this half-dead, sterilized male flies, and so it didn't work. Those aren't the only problems that plague us. We have the usual exploitation, cheap wages, refusal to let workers for themselves and by themselves decide through secret ballots to decide whether or not they want a union. The employers refuse to bargain in good faith. And we have a whole series of problems because of the refusal to bargain. For instance, there are several laws that we monitored last year by visiting 435 crews representing almost 40,000 workers to find out how those laws were being applied. Potable drinking water. Less than 10% of the crews had potable drinking water. They had water, but we don't know it was potable, but they had water, but less than 10%. There's a law that requires the employers to provide separate restroom facilities for men and women. Less than 5% had restrooms non-separate. There's a law in California that says that handling grapes is akin to handling food. Therefore, there has to be soap and water and towels for people to wash their hands when they go to the restroom. We did not find one single instance where they were being provided water and soap and towels. And so it goes. We ask you to join us in the boycott, in what we call public action, because for 29 years we have struggled and we've taken our case to the court of last resort, to the American consumer, and every single time we've taken the case to you, we've been successful. Let me tell you how it works, or how we think it works. In the public policy arena, we need to have 51%, a majority to win. And when you're electing those politicians that go and make the law, generally the election closes on a Tuesday evening and you can only vote once. And so the playing field is very uneven. But when we go to public action, we no longer need 51%. This grape boycott is going to be one with less than 9% of the consumers not buying grapes. The polls never close, especially the supermarkets are open 24 hours a day. Then you can vote every single time you go to the market. You don't buy grapes, you're voting. And then what happens is that it's accumulative. And all we're trying to do is not destroy the industry. We know we're not done. We want the industry to be vibrant and be healthy because we want to go back to work there. But we want them to get the idea that if they lose 9% of the market, they're beginning to their profits are going to be lessened, and just a message that worse things may come, to get them to come and do something about what you saw in the video, as they did back in 1970 with DDT and the other poisons, and we can get them. Now, how does the boycott work? I don't know. We like to pretend like we know because we are the foremost boycotters in the United States. We have more boycotts than anyone. In fact, more than most anyone, but we still don't know. We like to act like we don't. But let me tell you what we know. We suspect, by the expression, that there's a grapevine out there that people connect to, and it's done through word of mouth. Because the media doesn't do it for us. It never has. We're not important enough. The media comes after it's won, at the point it's been won, it becomes a big story, and they cover it. But they don't cover it before, and they don't cover it after. And then also, we suspect that the boycott begins to create a life of its own. We're told by the social scientists that when one person decides not to buy grapes, that person will influence 10 people in the course of a year. We also know that there are like 21.5% of the population in the United States could be considered societally conscious. And it's there where we go. Through a lot of demographic work and a lot of help from various universities, we find out where people live, such as Portland, Oregon. And we go there. And Seattle, Washington, and Eugene, Oregon, and San Francisco, and Boston. We know where people live who will support us. And we go there with this message. And then also, that the boycott begins to then grow geometrically. And then also that there's, as you know, as you hear, that there are, politics makes strange bedfellows. Boycotts make even stranger bedfellows. There's always this negotiation in the marketplace, in this free economy, where the buyer, the supermarket buyer, is trying to get the best deal from the grower, and the grower is trying to get the best deal from the buyer. And the grower wants to sell the grapes FOB, freight on board. The moment I load up the truck or the boxcar, you pay me. And the buyers are always trying to get the growers to send the grapes to them on consignment. When we receive them in New York or Washington or Portland, we'll pay you whatever the market rate, the market is at that point, but we'll pay you generally 90 to 120 days later. When the boycott begins to work, the competition, because there's big competition from the American dollar on fruits, and it goes this way. Americans buy bananas first, apples second, oranges third, and grapes fourth. And so that any time that the grape growers are inclined to lower the price of grapes to sell more, the bananas and the banana people and the apple people and the orange people don't want to lose their customers to cheap grapes, so they also lower their prices to be competitive. And so you, the consumers, win. And we win. And the buyers win. Everybody wins except the growers. And that's how it starts. Or at least that's how we see it. Because we don't have the definitive study yet on boycotts. We're looking for a university to undertake it, to really know, really know how it works. We suspect it works because people talk to one another. Also, because now there are 3 generations of Americans boycotting grapes. In 1965, there were some of you here, I'm sure, who had your children were small and you were boycotting grapes in the picket lines, and they were boycotting grapes. Now those children are married, they have their children, they're boycotting grapes, and the children are boycotting grapes. Now we have 3 generations of boycotters, so boycotting grapes is Americana. And so let me conclude with this thought. Today, no one knows how many farm workers live and work in the United States. We do know that there are approximately 800,000 children under the age of 12 who still work in the fields to make ends meet. We know the conditions, we know the deprivations, and we know the exploitation, and we know the discrimination, and we know the powerless of the people in many instances. And so these are the men and women and children who plant the seed and cultivate the plant and harvest the greatest amount of food known in the history of the world. Enough food so you and I can have 3 square meals a day. And yet, the same people who do this work oftentimes go hungry. And as they work for you, we ask you to work for them. Give them a chance. Boycott grapes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes and no. Let me explain. The large growers in Delano are talking about organic grapes, and I refer especially to Steve Pavage. And I don't support that because we've tested these grapes. We tested late last year, and we found in 20 boxes that we got in Southern California, we picked up at random, every single one showed pesticide residue. But even if that were not the case, Steve Pavage is really, really unfair to his workers. And so we say boycott him. Now, if there were to be small family farms that are organic, I would say yes.
Like Bensler? What about Bensler? Do you know them?
Where are they from?
They're Fresno.
No.
They're small family farm. They sell a lot up here. Bensler Family Farm.
Yeah. They can't sell too many, otherwise they're not small. I don't really know. They might not be very big, but if they sell a lot, then they cannot be that small. Okay. Thanks. California wines. The industry in California is divided into three parts. We have the wine, the raisins, and the fresh grapes. Although they do use pesticides in wines, and they use a lot of sulfites and other chemicals to make wine, and they use pesticides on raisins, they don't use as much as they use on the fresh grapes. And also because we don't have the resources to boycott all the grapes, we need to separate that into sections so we can be more successful. So at this point, we're not boycotting the raisins and we're not boycotting the wines, except we do join with our brothers and sisters in Washington State who are boycotting the Saint Michel wines. Other than that, we're not boycotting the wines.
Can you talk about that Saint Michel boycott a little bit? And maybe the asparagus boycott, Phil, not even about that?
I don't know very much about the asparagus boycott. The Saint Michel wine is the largest winery in Washington. A group of workers came to the union there in the valley and asked for their help. When the union went and tried to contact the employer fired some of the workers. The union went back and battled them and got the workers re-employed, but the employer has refused to recognize the union, refuses to give them a right to have an election to determine representational rights, and refuses to meet or in any way debate or decide or deal to negotiate the issues. Therefore, they're boycotting Saint Michel. Yes.
Since grapes, like most fruits, use a lot of water. When the grape, if the water is contaminated, will the grape itself inside be contaminated?
Well, that's an interesting thought. There are now some scientists that are saying that the contaminated water will tend to contaminate the plant organically, and then that transfers to the fruit. I don't know if we can make that case yet, but even if that weren't the case, a lot of pesticides today are systemic pesticides, and they are laid at the base of the root, at the root base, and then the pesticide becomes an integral part of the plant, and that's how then the fruit gets the pesticide. So therefore, you cannot wash or you cannot remove the residue from the fruit. That's grapes and other fruits. And also, when there are several types of work in the application of pesticides. One group of workers are called mixers. These are the men that mix the pesticides with water and also the oil-based solutions, which are adhesives, to make sure that when the pesticide is sprayed, it clings to the fruit so it'll do its job. And so because of those reasons, it's very difficult or impossible to wash the pesticides off the fruit.
A few years ago, the watermelon case on the
Well, yeah, that was the case. That happened in west where I live, about 20 miles from where I live. And what happened there, this is the watermelon poisoning about 3 years ago. Like 11 people died here in the West Coast. And what happened was that they caught the growers. There were 3 growers that were using a pesticide that's restricted not to be used in watermelons. They were using it. The state then made a big drive. They confiscated all the watermelons to find out where it was coming from. They located the 3 growers. The Department of Agriculture director said, we're going to prosecute these people to the fullest extent of the law. Nothing happened to them. In fact, what happened, the same director of the Department of Agriculture went to the state legislature and got something like $22 million to make the watermelon growers whole because they had lost because of that publicity. And they forgot to include the workers who all lost work. But no one was ever brought to justice. And 11 lives were lost. Some here in your own state, as I understand it. Yes.
What kind of support are you getting from universities and other institutions, churches, that sort of thing, in terms of either them helping to organize people for the boycott or refusing, for example, to buy the grapes for procurement for universities, colleges, things like that?
We're getting excellent support from universities. A number of universities, because of Student Action, have taken the grapes off of the food services. We've gotten students in many instances from universities to help us go boycott the stores near the universities. In some cases, we've been able to extend the ban to the caterers that bring food into the university to do that. Not so much from the church. The other group is helping a lot are the environmentalists and also the unions and what we call the cause-oriented organizations, and particularly environmentalists and also people involved in the South American, Latin American dispute. Those people are helping us a lot.
Next, we turn to acknowledge fellow farm labor organizer, social justice activist, and wife of Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta. We dug up a 2008 interview with Dolores Huerta from Los Angeles' KPFK station on the Pocho Hour Power show. The discussion is around Huerta's endorsement of Hilary Clinton for president in the 2008 primary.
Oh, man.
All right.
Boxy.
Instead of Boxy D, we have the poetic stylings of
Dolores
Huerta.
Dolores Huerta is joining us here on the Pocho Hour Power. Welcome, Dolores.
Yeah, this is me.
How are you? Welcome to the Pocho Hour Power.
Oh, it's great. I wish I could be there with you in person because being on your program is so much fun. It's really a happening, an experience.
Yes, it is. Well, we were very proud that you were our first guest once we regained our rightful position back at 4 o'clock, and I'll never get over it. That's why I keep bringing it up. And you said, fittingly, Dolores, que vivan los pochos, right?
Absolutely, because I consider I'm one of those.
That's right. You're the reina de las pochas. So how are you doing, Dolores?
So I'm la pocha abuelita.
You're la pocha. You're the world's busiest pocha because you are everywhere, and you historically travel all over the place. It's hard to keep up with you. And right now, this is the political season, and I was reminded that you were out and about, and I think this is before the UFW endorsement of Hilary Clinton, but you did a public kind of calling out of Barack Obama.
You know, actually, basically when people have been asking me, why do you support Hilary Clinton, and I'm saying, number one, because she's got the leadership, number two, she's got the courage, she's got the intelligence, and she can deliver for us. And when they say, and I was just in Nevada working with the casino workers over there during the election, and the thing is that Obama doesn't really have a relationship with the Latino community. They've kind of taken the Si Se Puede thing to try to connect himself, but the history just simply isn't there. It's not there in California. It wasn't there in Nevada, and it's kind of just barely there in Chicago because Obama was really not involved with the big immigrant rights movement. As we know, everything that happened started in Chicago. They had the first big march. I mean, they had Elvira Adriano that was there in a sanctuary for a whole year, and during all that time, even though Mayor Daley and Senator Durbin and all of the Democratic legislators supported Elvira and her cause there against deportation, Obama never went there, not even one time, to visit her or to stand up for her. And so, and I think that was a really big issue in our community, that this woman had the courage that she did to be able to say, I'm not going to be deported, I'm not going to leave my citizen son behind. And Mr. Obama was just simply not there, and so that's why I say that the relationship with our community isn't there. And Senator Clinton, a lot of people don't know this, but Raul Izaguirre, who is also an early endorser of Hillary, told us that he first met Hillary Clinton in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. I mean, this is like the poorest place in the whole United States of America, next to Mississippi. It's the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. And she was out there registering Latino people to vote, when she was, in her 20s. And so I think that, speaks to the fact that she was there. And, and I met Hilary when Bill Clinton, the president, first got elected. And, she reached out and she had Latino women come to Washington. She wanted to talk to us to hear about our issues. And at that point, I'm sure she never even had in mind that she was going to someday run for president. Anyway, this is why I really respect her, and why I'm out here as a volunteer, really working for her.
That makes sense. I mean, that's also a reason that we had the head of the Culinary Workers Union come on and say that they had a long history with him, but maybe it wasn't, it was more about labor as opposed, because he was an organizer, I guess, right. And because he marched with them at Senator Obama.
They were marching against the hotels. He came down and worked with them and was marching with them. That
union is about half Latino. The lady said 45%. Yeah, she mentioned that he had marched at the Congress Hotel in Chicago. Now, as far as the labor thing goes, isn't John Edwards kind of more the go-to guy? I think the more conspicuously labor guy that people would naturally go to, or we just had at that latter point in the campaign where the UFW just endorsed Hillary. What, this week?
Yeah, I think it was Monday on Martin Luther King Day. Yeah. But actually, Hilary Clinton has, as a senator from New York, she has introduced or co-sponsored more than 30 labor bills, everything from the Free Choice Act to the extension of unemployment insurance, to the extension of workers' compensation. I mean, major pieces of legislation that she has introduced or co-sponsored. She has personally been involved in mediating over 12 labor disputes, between unions and employers. Personally gotten involved in that. She's walked picket lines. And so the story that the culinary workers are putting out there isn't quite true. And actually in Nevada it was kind of interesting because the Latino workers there, like 69% voted for Hillary Clinton, in spite of the fact that there was a lot of intimidation. And I'm not going to put this on Maria. Maria Durazo, to me, is one of the greatest women I've ever known. She's a great labor leader. Yeah. She's a great Latina leader. And the woman is sincere to the bone. I don't think she's got a dishonest bone in her body. She's just a wonderful person. And I love her. I respect her so much. But the people on the ground, the Obama people over there, let me tell you that they were intimidating workers. They were telling workers, if you don't vote for Obama, you can't. We're not going to give you a ride to the polls, because they only had an hour to vote. Any people that was going to vote, if they're going to vote for Hillary, they can't. They would not take them to the polls. Mm-hmm. They had to be for Obama. They were told you can't go vote unless the name is on a list. And this is at the Flamingo Hotel. One of the women says, "Well, how do I get my name on the list?" They said, "Well, you have to have seniority." This lady said, "I've been here for 12 years. How do I get my name on the list?" And then they said, "Oh, well, it's too late. You can't get on the list."
Because they knew she was not a Obama supporter.
Because she was a Hillary supporter, right? And they were told if they were Hillary supporters and they left work to go vote, then they were going to get docked. They couldn't come back to work, and they would have reduced points in their personal files. At Caesar's Palace, I was actually escorted out of the building, and we went down. The managers invited us to the dining room where all the workers were eating, and we were passing out our Hillary buttons, and we made this great leaflet that said, "Sí con la Unión y sí con Hillary." We're not anti-union. Sí con la Unión. Well, they said you can't pass out your literature here. And there was an Obama table there. The Obama guys were there. They had their T-shirts. They had their literature. And I said, "Well, hey, wait a minute. They're in here in this dining room, and they're passing out their stuff. Why can't we pass out Hillary stuff?" And they said, "You have to get permission." And we said, "Okay, how do we get permission?" They said, "Oh, you can't get permission."
You can't.
The security guard escorted us out of the building.
Wow.
Was it a black security guard?
The door. Yeah.
I knew it.
No, it wasn't. It was actually a white guy named. His name was. You'll love his
Tyrone, wasn't it?
His name was Daryl.
Daryl, same thing. Daryl, Tyrone, same thing.
Yeah, his name was Daryl. But in spite of all of that intimidation that the workers had, there are 9 casinos that had voting sites for workers. 7 of the 9 casinos voted for Hillary Clinton. And in some of those other casinos, he only won like by, you know, three or four people, you know.
Yeah.
So their enthusiasm for Hillary was just great. They call her La Hilaria. They call themselves Los Hilarios, you know what I mean? So, like I say to people when they say, y nos dicen, in fact, I was just speaking to a woman here in California on the phone, you know, because they opened up 3 offices on their own. They're down there in Moreno Valley, you know.
Yes.
You know, coming to LA, getting the literature. And the woman that was doing this, she's a great woman, se llama Luz Ayala. She said, pues el señor, ¿cómo se llama? You know what I mean? Because they don't even know his name, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I was reading a thing about overall recruitment of Latinos by all the candidates, and, you know, basically boiled down to, you know, Hillary and Obama, and they were saying that some people were like, I can't find this guy's name on the list. I'm looking for Mr. Omega, you know.
It's a tragedy.
But so beyond, you know, is it still just the history then, Dolores? Because in that article I read, it was something like 65% or something of Latinos were going for Hillary. And hey, I enjoyed the Clinton years as much as anybody else. You know, is this a historical thing? Is this like from those immigrants that became naturalized, or what?
Or are they voting? Are they voting because? What percentage you think is voting because they think Bill is actually going to run stuff?
Yeah.
Or you know what I'm saying? Because I don't know how many people really think, oh, I'm voting for Hillary because I love her, or are they saying, well, I'm voting for Hillary because you know Bill will be back in there.
I think it's a matter of trust and a matter of faith for the people that remember the Clinton years, that they were good years, you know. Then it's, you know, there's another thing too that I think in our community, and as a feminist, let me say this, that I think a lot of the Latino community respect her because she stayed in that marriage, you know. I gotta say that, you know, because you know, I mean, and so it's that kind
That's
of
a Catholic thing.
Yeah,
it's a Cuban cigar thing.
Well, plus she'll also have her chance to get down in the Oval Office.
Payback, because you know women never forget.
Yeah, that's true. But you know what? They say it's better to get even, no?
I don't want to be that guy.
Oh,
yeah. the woman has got guts. I mean, just the fact that she's even running in the first place, you know, that to me shows that she's got a lot of guts, and she's got a lot of leadership, and that's what we're going to need, you know.
Dolores, you're very close with Hillary. Why can we just call her right now and see if she'll be on the Pocho Hour Power?
Hook it up, Dolores.
Well, who knows? I think we probably should get something so that you guys at least play on the program over there, because I know what an important voice you are for our community, and you are the dispellers of truth, you know, in the LA Times every day, and you know the great the way that you're able to you know kind of crystallize what people need to know. I want to say one other thing too about the whole driver's license issue. You know, I was talking to my friends in Chicago, because I went to Chicago like 4 times to be there with Elvira Arellano, and also for another campaign that they did to get 2 Latinos out of prison that had been unjustly convicted for a murder that they did not commit. And the real guy who had committed that murder had already confessed. But the guy who had them, the prosecutor who was running for governor, and he was trying to do it, you know, on the legacy of putting these 2 guys in prison. Well, the committee that had done this campaign to get these 2 young men released, they went to see then State Senator Obama, and he wouldn't give them the time of day. So that's what I'm talking about, courage, you know. They did get released eventually, but the people that did the big campaña, you know, to get these 2 young men released,
sure.
You know, they are, you know, very definitely turned off on the senator, because that's what I'm talking about having courage, you know, and I think that's why I am really, really, you know, very, very strong for Hillary Clinton.
All right. Well, where else you going? Are you traveling right now for the Clinton campaign or anything like that? Or
yeah, I'm a volunteer. You know, I'm not getting paid, and we're going to be opening up the East LA office, and we invite people to come down there. It's on Cesar Chavez Boulevard near Ford. Those 2 streets. So you know, let the word get out there, and we'd like to have you all come down. Lalo, come down, and the rest of you, the folks there in the studio, come on down.
Great.
And you know, maybe you can do some little sketches and some jokes there. And I think the address is 2512, I believe. But it's on Cesar Chavez Boulevard near Ford. The cross street is Ford.
Great. Well, Dolores Huerta, thank you so much for being on the Pocho Hour Power. You are our #1 favorite guest.
Oh, thank you so much, and I hope I can get back over there so we can do it live, okay?
Right on.
Right in person there.
Okay, gracias. That was
Okay,
Dolores.
que vivan los pochos.
Hey, go ahead, girl.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. That was Dolores Huerta on the Pocho Hour of Power.
Simone.
We are high caliber, baby. Only the best. We'll be right back with more Pocho Hour Power.
That was Dolores Huerta speaking at a community radio station in Los Angeles, KPFK, in 2008. Before we move on, we bring you a brief clip of Cesar Chavez speaking on behalf of the United Farm Workers in 1966, followed by an even briefer clip of Dolores Huerta taken 1968. Both of these excerpts are available to KBOO courtesy of the Pacifica Radio Archives and the From the Vault series.
In the 1960s, Chicano farm workers in California and the Southwest began to organize a union. Farm workers in the 30s, many of them from the Dust Bowl states as well as Mexican Americans, had tried to unionize and failed. The current struggle in the lettuce fields, the grape vineyards, the melon fields, owes its energy and spirit to the cultural unity of the great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of a people to whom this land once belonged. California, 1966.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 de la mañana. El sol calienta ranchos anchos y de luz todos los baña. Y a esos campos van los niños campesinos. Sin un destino, son peregrinos de verdad. Van de camino los veranos, inviernos y primaveras, cruzando estados y condados y ciudades extranjeras. Como las golondrinas van bajo los cielos, dándose vuelo de sus anhelos de verdad. Van a los files de la uva, betabel y de manzana, y ahí los niños se la pasan todo el día entre las ramas, de sol a sol hasta que llegan pagadores, dándole flores para dolores de verdad. Pero algún día esos niños serán hombres y mujeres, trabajadores campesinos que defienden sus quereres, y mano en mano tomarán otro camino, con un destino pa' campesinos de verdad.
March 31st of 1962, I quit my job with the Community Service Organization in Los Angeles and came to Delano with the idea of organizing farm workers, with the idea of forming a workers group that would not rely on outside financial assistance for at least for the initial part of the organization, a group that if it were to be organized would have to, at least the financial part of that organizing would have to come from the workers themselves. And so after a few weeks of rest and planning, we began the work of getting farm workers together, talking to them about the advantages of organization and also the responsibilities. In my 12 or so years working under Alinsky and Fred Ross, I had learned one thing, and that is that anywhere you go, you will find a small group of people, whether it be students or university professors or farm workers, who are already interested enough to do something about the problem that confronts them. So on this basis, I went, and in order to build the beginning or the foundations of the association, I visited something like 85 small communities, including labor camps, and was thus able to form the nucleus of the Farm Workers Association.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 de la mañana. El sol calienta ranchos anchos y de luz todos los baña. Y a esos campos solo van los esquiroles. Viva la huelga, viva la huelga, viva la causa de verdad.
one of the things that we try to get with the movement of the farm workers and with organization is that this is why you organize. You organize to try to get political and economic power. Right now, of course, we don't have it.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to archival audio that we're bringing you in remembrance of the work of Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and the United Farm Workers. Next, you'll hear Dolores Huerta from a Columbus Community Radio Foundation recording at a 2005 luncheon in Columbus, Ohio. Huerta speaks about immigrants' rights, organizing, international trade, U.S. foreign policy, and more. You are listening to KBOO 90.7 FM.
KBOO Community Radio is a proud co-sponsor of Las Perlas, an evening of flamenco variety, Saturday, April 15 at 8 p.m. at the Echo Theater in Portland. Las Perlas presents a flamenco variety shows with artists, musicians, and humor that will show the depth of flamenco expression. Again, that's Las Perlas, an evening of flamenco variety, Saturday, April 15th at 8 p.m. at the Echo Theater, 1515 Southeast 37th Avenue in Portland. More information can be found at kboo.fm at the homepage under Community Events.
KBOO Community Radio is a proud co-sponsor of the Gospel of Loving Kindness at the Interstate Firehouse Cultural Center in Portland. The Gospel of Loving Kindness is a play by Marcus Gardley based on the true story of 15-year-old Hadiya Pendleton, who was killed in Chicago after performing at the presidential inauguration in 2013. This play runs from March 10th through April 9th on Fridays and Saturdays at 7:30 p.m. and Sundays at 3 p.m. Again, that's The Gospel of Loving Kindness, March 10th through April 9th on Fridays and Saturdays at 7:30 p.m. and Sundays at 3 p.m. at the Interstate Firehouse Cultural Center, 5340 North Interstate in Portland. More information is available at kboo.fm on the right-hand side of the homepage under Community Events.
Please join me in welcoming our distinguished, honorable, accomplished, remarkable guest, Miss Dolores Huerta.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you, Mr. Alcada. And I want to thank all of you for attending this luncheon, and also the Royal Council for inviting me, and also for having this organization, which is such an important organization. I would hope that someday you'll have one in every single city throughout the United States of America, because we know that what happens in our world is affecting us daily, and unfortunately we have so much ignorance in our society about the rest of the world, which makes it sad when you consider which a powerful country we are, the United States of America, and how what we do impacts the rest of the world. And definitely then what happens over there impacts on us. So it's very important that this organization be spread throughout the country, and so that people will start thinking in terms of not only our country, but thinking in terms of world affairs and how they affect us. So, and it's interesting because when I arrived in Ohio, they were telling me that as an example that you will soon have maybe an initiative on your ballot for English only, right? And when we think about how ridiculous that is, that we're still talking about that kind of xenophobia as English only, when at the same time we know that we are now in the midst of globalization, and that we have money that crosses borders, we have jobs that cross borders, and except of course the people that try to cross the border are the ones that get arrested, right? It's okay to move the money, it's okay to move, move products, but when the people try to move, of course, maybe that's not so good, right? That's not okay. It was interesting, the song that was sang just a few months ago that we heard, and the Spanish words were about the sun, and the words were sol que eres tan parejo, repartiendo tu luz. The sun is shedding its light and its warmth in a very even manner over everybody. Sol que eres, sun that you are shedding your light in a very even way, and that everybody then is comforted by the sun. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we would think in terms of globally that the wealth of the world would also be spread evenly, and so that all could benefit from the warmth of our prosperity instead of just a few, the way that it is now. When we talk about immigration, and I have to ask this question, and we talk about what a crisis this is that we're now in immigration, and we think, well, let's look at this so-called crisis. Is it really a crisis? When you have a lot of people in our country that are undocumented, that are working, that are contributing to the society, that are kind of holding up our economy because they're not being given the benefits of Social Security, unemployment insurance, all of these other benefits that American workers are supposed to receive. And yet they're contributing so much, not only with their sweat of their labor, but also with their tax dollars, which they're not getting back. They're providing all these tax dollars. Every time that they buy anything, they're paying taxes. And so, where's the crisis at? Is it with these folks here that are the victims, or is it with the beneficiaries, and we are the beneficiaries? And so I just want to start out by saying that I think that so-called attack on immigrants and the so-called crisis on immigration is really a distraction. And I'm going to put it in the same level of the distraction that we have in the war against women, the war against women's rights, the women's rights to choose, in the same category as the attack on gays and lesbians, right? Is that a crisis? But we see a lot of publicity about this, and there's a lot of focus on these so-called moral values. And I just have to say that, when you talk about human rights of gays and lesbians, and you ask the question, if Thelma and Louise get married, does that affect your paycheck? I don't think it does, right? Those are privacy issues. Those are constitutional issues. When you talk about a woman's right to choose, part of my biography that Barbara didn't read is that I have 11 children. Well, does that mean that everybody needs to have 11 children? Of course not, right? That was my choice. And again, a person and a family, a woman's right to choose is her right. How many children she decides she wants to have. That is a constitutional right. These are privacy issues, right? And so why do we have so much focus on those issues? Is it because what we really want to do when we attack gays and lesbians, when we attack women's right to choose, when we attack immigrants? Is it because it's really a distraction about what are the real issues that are affecting our country and our families? The war in Iraq, the money that is going to pay for that war, what's happening to our economy, what's happening to our tax dollars. Our tax dollars, it should be used for health. Americans pay more money for health care than any other country in the world. Yet we're the only industrialized country that doesn't have a national health care. When we talk about education, our money should be coming for education, and it's not. We're spending more, in California at least, and I don't know about Ohio, but we're spending as much money on prisons right now as we are for higher education in the state of California. So these are issues that really, really impact on our families. But instead, the drums that we're hearing and the clamor that we're hearing is about immigration. And we have some of our congresspeople that are saying, let's build a border, let's build a wall, all the way from Florida or from Texas, all along Texas, all the way to California. We should build this big wall to keep out the terrorists that are coming in from Mexico, right? Well, if I remember correctly, the only terrorists that came into the United States came into the Canadian border, right? Not to the Mexican border. And then, of course, they were caught. So, but I think if our congresspeople were to say, let's build a wall across the Canadian border, people would not put up with that, right? Now, why is that? Why is it that we can say build a wall on the Mexican border and not the Canadian border? We might question then, does that really have kind of a little racist tinge to it, right? We need to keep the Mexicans out and not the Canadians? And so, you know, we have to ask ourselves this question. And I think that the racism is a very big part of what's happening now in this whole cry for immigration reform. And if we look at the history of the United States, we had during after World War II, or during World War II, we had this Bracero program where people were brought in from Mexico by the millions. And it happened starting from 1942 or 43, right when the war broke out, because if you'll remember that a lot of our people went to the war, so they needed labor, especially for our agricultural fields. So a lot of Mexicans were brought in. It's kind of interesting. In my town where I grew up in Stockton, California, we had a lot of the World War II prisoners from Germany and Italy, and they were housed there in Stockton, California, and they were all in these neat little white cottages. And they would bring the prisoners of war into town, they would take them to the movies, and, you know, they were kind of treated like fairly decently. But the Mexicans that were brought in to work in our fields during the Bracero program, they had them behind barbed wire, right? In these really, really ugly barracks. And people that tried to go in and see the relatives weren't allowed to. So one had to ask the question, who were the prisoners of war? Were they the Mexicans or were they the prisoners of war from Italy and Germany? It was kind of interesting. And that, again, I think reflects sort of kind of the racism that we have in our society. Well, what happened after the Bracero program finally ended, during the course from 1942 up to 1964, that program went on forever, that many of these people were brought in. There were families that were disrupted, etc. And everybody denounced the program, and we finally ended it. But one of the problems is that the wages had been dropped so low during that time that the farm workers themselves, the local farm workers, were suffering. Wages were down to like 50 cents an hour. And that is, of course, one of the impetus that started us to organize the United Farm Workers Union. But when that program ended in 1964, there was a legalization program in the United States. And interestingly enough, it happened without any legislation. They just did it, you know. 500,000 of the ex-braceros were then given immigration status, and their families were also brought in without any legislation. It just happened. So then, 20 years down the line, we have a big furor about immigration again. And in 1984, we had another law that was passed that legalized 3 million undocumented residents of the United States. And among those were 1,400,000 farm workers that were legalized. So here we are in year 2005, right? We go 20 years down the line, and again we have the same furor about immigration. And you know what? I am predicting that we're going to have another legalization bill. It's going to happen. Because it's like you can't ignore the elephant in the room. The people are already here. They're here, they're working, you know, they're contributing to the society. And it's interesting that we never blame the employers that bring in the workers. These workers don't just come by accident. They're actually recruited, and they're brought into the United States. There's employers there that are willing to hire them. And so they create the situation. But again, we blame the immigrants. We don't blame them. The other thing that we have to look at, when we talk about immigration, we have to talk about our policies. Policies of the United States of America that create the immigration. You know, and we have to go back to when Ronald Reagan was president, we had the wars in Central America. And you know, when we were in there and we were bombing El Salvador, by the way, there's a really great movie called Innocent Voices. I urge everybody to see that movie. I don't know if it's playing here or not, but try to look for it and find it. And this movie depicts what was happening in El Salvador, and it's why so many people had to leave El Salvador, because they were getting killed because of the wars in El Salvador. And the United States had a very key role in making that war happen, as of course we did also in Nicaragua. So all of the immigrants from Central America that came here, and let's add Guatemala into the picture also, they came here escaping those wars. People don't want to leave their homeland. The only reason that they leave is because they have to, you know, because they're escaping poverty, or they're escaping wars, and then they come to the United States. Then we have our other laws that we've passed, like NAFTA, the free trade agreements. There is no way in the world that a small farmer in Mexico can compete with agribusiness. No way. We have, in the Farm Workers Union, there's one family in particular that they had a small farm in Mexico. They hired 40 workers. What happened? They were put out of business. That farmer is here with all of the 40 workers that used to work at his ranch. You know, they all had to come to the United States. So we really have to look at our policies and to see, because the problem doesn't start over there, the problem starts here in the United States of America. It starts right here. And now we just passed CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement. And that just passed the Congress by a couple of votes, but it passed. And that's going to create, again, more problems over there. And there's a big difference in the way that we treat Latin America in the way that we treated, say, for instance, Japan and Germany. And I like to refer to that because during World War II, we know that Germany and Japan were the enemies of the United States. These are the people that we were fighting. Well, we won that war, but those countries were pretty much destroyed. So what did the United States do? We lent Germany and Japan money to build up their infrastructure and to build up their economy. And after we gave them these massive loans to build up their economies, we forgave the loans. We forgave the loans. So the difference between what we did there and what we're doing in Latin America is that we actually help these countries build their economies. What we do over here with NAFTA and CAFTA is that American companies go into Mexico, they go into Central America, they go into South America, and it's American companies then that are using the resources, using the labor, and taking out the profits, right, from those countries. The profits do not stay there. They come back over here, you know? And those people that are working in these sweatshops, they really don't make a lot of money. They barely make enough money to survive. You know, they don't make a lot of money. And in some of the areas we have like disastrous consequences, like in Juarez, Mexico, where you've had close to 400 women that have been raped and murdered. And many of those women that were raped and murdered worked at these sweatshops in Mexico. And I just want to talk about it just for a second. I went with a congressional delegation to Juarez, Mexico, and we met with the owners of the maquiladoras, they call them, these big, beautiful factories. These factories are state-of-the-art. They're absolutely just beautiful. And when we met with the owners and we said to them, what are you doing about protecting the lives of these women? And they showed us a picture. They showed us a picture of a young woman, and it said in Spanish, cuídate, which means take care of yourself. And then they had another poster that they had in the factory, and that poster said, don't walk in the dark, don't walk in the dark. Well, you know what? Where these young women lived, there are no lights. I mean, going from the beautiful factories and then going to the homes where these women lived and these families lived, it's just horrible. I mean, they didn't have street lights, they didn't have water for a long time, they got water not too long ago. There's nothing but dirt and stones and just these little squatters' huts that they built for themselves. Horrible. So you would think if these American companies, if these companies would go in there to make all this money by paying these very low wages, that they would at least care about the people that work there. And I think so that our philosophy as a country has got to change. We can't just think that all of these countries are there for us to go in and exploit and to take out their resources and to use their people, you know? We have to think in terms of using our power, how can we go into these countries and help them make their lives better? Every one of those countries in Mexico, Latin America, Central America, there is so much work to be done just in building their own infrastructure, just in helping them build their own infrastructure and say, okay, we're going to help you, but you've got to do something to develop your economies. Not we're going to go in there and take it over, which has been our philosophy. And as I say, what we did before with Japan and Germany, why can't we use that same model and use that with our other countries that we're supposedly trying to help, right? Instead of making it like the imperialistic positions that we've had recently, it's almost like a second colonization. You know, sometimes I think that if we go back into history, and recently I just talked to a group of high school students and we were talking about Africa, but if we go back into world history and we think of all of the European countries that came in there and colonized Latin America and that colonized Africa, and they took all of the gold and the diamonds and all of the riches from these countries, if somehow they had to give it back with interest, right? couldn't you just kind of erase a lot of the poverty that now exists? So I think that, one thing about organizing, when Cesar and I started organizing the farm workers, everybody said to us, you can't organize farm workers. They're too poor, they don't speak English, and they're migrant. And in those days, by the way, we had nothing like unemployment insurance or food stamps. When farm workers finished the harvest, they had to go on and move on to the next town to be able to feed their families. In fact, the farm worker, I remember, said to us, they will put a man on the moon before farm workers get unemployment insurance. And we did. We put a man on the moon in 1969. And in California, we did not get unemployment insurance till 1975 when Jerry Brown got elected governor of California, and then we got the law to allow farm workers to organize. And I'll bet in Ohio, you still don't have unemployment insurance for farm workers. And somebody might ask the question, do you or do you not? In fact, most of the states don't even have workers' compensation for farm workers. If they get hurt on the job, they're out of luck. Their medical bills don't get paid, they don't get any kind of disability payment. And I say this because it shows how retarded we are in terms of a country, in terms of our social policies, is the way that we treat working people. The farm workers, which are the most, sacred people of all because they put our food on our table. And I like to say to students, if you had to go on a deserted island and you could only take one person with you, like Survivor, that program, would you take a farm worker or an attorney? And I think it kind of brings the message home, right? And it shows you how sometimes we have our priorities upside down, and backwards, right? But the thing is that when we started organized farm workers, the one thing that we had to do to farm workers is we had to say to them, nobody can do this for you. You've got to take responsibility. You've got to do this for yourselves, right? You've got to do this for yourselves. And if you don't organize, if you don't stand up, if you don't march and strike and go out there and do boycotts, nothing's ever going to change for you. And they did it. The farm workers did it. And I think that that's kind of the message that we have to have for ourselves also, that as a country, as the United States of America, a citizen of the United States of America, we've got to start taking responsibility. And we can't just say, leave it up to our legislators, all right? We've got to tell them. We've got to give them the advice. I think we have to constantly remind ourselves that our president, who does he work for? Works for us, right? Who pays his salary? We do, right? Our senators, our congresspeople, our legislators in the state capitals, who do they work for? They work for us. And we've got to make them accountable, and we've got to make them responsible, and we've got to find out what's going on, and not just believe what we're told in the press about how great things are. In our evening news, what do we get? We get the local crime report, right? All the car chases and the burglaries and the murders, and if a murder happens in Florida, you're going to hear about it in Ohio, right? Because we're all supposed to live in this constant state of fear. What we don't get, and I tell people, read the business section of the newspaper. That's the other crime report, right? These are, you read about all these guys that are either going to jail or should be going to jail, right? And they don't steal, it's not like these petty theft and burglary. I mean, these guys are stealing millions of dollars, and getting away with it. And yet, we don't, because they have good attorneys, right, that can defend them. And so we really got to find out what's going on in our country, what's going on with our tax dollars, what's going on with our foreign policy, and start looking behind what we see, on the evening news, because we're not going to get the information there. We've got to read Nation magazine, read the American Prospect, right? Read The Economist. Let's look at some of these other newspapers and periodicals that really give us the true story about what's going on. And in terms of immigration, the Bush's proposals for guest worker programs are not good. They're not good. This is a slave program. This is what this is. It's a slave program. People are going to be brought in. They're going to be working 30 or 40 miles outside of Ohio on some of these farm belts out here. They're not going to get decent wages. There's nobody, and every single time that they've had guest workers, and we do have that program on the East Coast, the H-2A it's called, every time that they violated the law, they've always been found guilty. There's no way that they can police this kind of a program to make sure that workers are treated justly. And one other thing is that we have right now restrictions in the law that say they cannot bring in foreign workers unless they pay prevailing wages, unless they recruit local farm workers or other people that want to do the jobs. We have unemployment. In our African American community, we have huge unemployment. that racism still continues in this country, And we don't have what you call a labor shortage, you have a wage shortage and a benefit shortage, that people are not getting decent wages or they're not getting decent benefits. And it's interesting, again, talking to the high school students this morning, and they were saying to me, don't you think a minimum wage, a hike in the minimum wage is bad? No, it's not. If the minimum wage is raised, that means people have money to spend into their local stores, the grocery stores, the retail stores, and the whole economy gets lifted up. And it's so sad to think that young people would think that raising the minimum wage is bad. And if the minimum wage were to be where it's supposed to be, if the minimum wage would have kept up with inflation, our minimum wage today should be $15 an hour. $15 an hour. That's how far behind we are in our economy right now. But people aren't paying attention. I was with Cindy Sheehan the other night. And Cindy Sheehan, who is the woman who set up a compound there in front of George Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas, and she lost her son Casey in the war. And when I heard Cindy speak, she read a poem that one of her daughters had written, or one daughter had written. And the poem said, "America has been rocked to sleep. America has been rocked to sleep." Well, I remember at the Democratic Convention in 1968, there was a great woman named Fannie Lou Hamer, and she came to that convention and she yelled out, "America, wake up! Wake up, America!" And her battle cry, was like that. She aroused that convention, and they had formed this Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party because they were contesting the fact that African Americans didn't have the right to vote in Mississippi and in the South. And it was one of the cries, along with the murder of Emmett Till, along with Rosa Parks, Dr. King, that started that civil rights movement. Well, you know what? We need a new movement here in the United States. We need a movement for economic justice. It is not right that our CEOs of companies get 400 times more than a worker gets. 40 years ago, a CEO got 40 times more than a worker. That our CEOs of Fortune 500 companies have an average salary of $3 million to $9 million a year. When you think about, I remember my economics teacher told me, no matter how much money you have, you can only eat 3 meals a day. You can only eat 3 meals a day. You can only wear one suit of clothes a day. And the legacy that we want to leave our children is one of justice, not property or jewels, because they'll fight over that, right? So if you leave them the love for justice, that is a much better inheritance to leave our children. And we've all got to fight really hard to end the racism in our society. The only reason it's so easy to attack immigrants is because they happen to be brown, right? And that's why it's easy to attack them. And unless we start really teaching our children, what the contributions of people of color have been to this country, Native Americans whose land we took, that we're sitting on right now, with no thank yous or no reparations. The children of African Americans, descendants of people that were brought here in chains, and that we still have never done anything to repair that damage. So these are things that we have to change, and we have to start insisting that we include K through 12, the true story of America, the exploitation, the people that have built this country, Asians that were brought here also, and maybe someday we can end it. And when we end racism here, then that means it will affect our foreign policies in other countries, because I don't think we would be bombing Iraq if the population there was Caucasian. We would not be doing that. So we really got to look into our inner souls and see how we can save our democracy, how we can save our country, and I think that will impact our foreign policy. So I want to just close, and I don't know if we have time for questions or not. We do? Okay, good. So I want to close by asking you all to join me in a good old farm worker viva, okay? We want to do one for peace, for justice, and one for Cesar Chavez, who was such a great human being. But I also want to teach you a new word, one from South Africa. And this is a Zulu word. And when I use this word, it's just kind of a reminder to all of us that we are one human race. Homo sapiens sapien, right? One human race. And where did our human race begin? Africa, right? So we always have to remember that we are all Africans of different shades and colors. And if we can remember that, then we will end racism in our society. That we all have to treat each other as if we were all sisters and brothers and cousins. and I believe you said this morning we were all 34 times removed from each other, right, in terms of being relationships. So the word I want to teach you is wozani, and it means people are coming together to fight for justice, okay? The people are coming together to fight for justice. So I want you to say that word with me. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and I want all of you to shout wozani at the top of your lungs, okay? Pretend you're farm workers, okay? Okay, so we'll say wozani first, and then we'll say the vivas, okay? I'll go first. I'll say 1, 2, 3. I'll shout wozani. 1, 2, 3. Wozani. 1, 2, 3. Wozani. 1, 2, 3. Wozani. Okay. Now we'll do a couple of vivas. We'll say 1 for peace. I'll say viva la paz. Everybody shout viva, and then I'll say viva la justicia, which is Spanish for justice. Okay. And just shout viva again at the top of your lungs. Viva la paz. Viva. Louder.
And next we bring you a story that takes us to Woodburn, Oregon, where in 2006, radio activists, carpenters, tech geeks, workers, and families gathered to build a low-power station for PCUN, the Tree Planters and Farm Workers United of the Northwest. That program will start in just a moment. It is Cesar Chavez Day here at KBOO.
¿Cómo estás? ¿Todo bien? We're glad to be joining the family of community radio, and we're really proud that so many KBOistas have come down to be a part of the birth of a new member of the community radio family.
I've learned so much already. I'm like, whoa!
It is a bit like Radio Geek Summer Camp.
Ooh, everybody wants to solder.
People's voices are going to be like coming like through those cables into the mixer to go out to the world. It's a very important job.
Woo, I made a female.
What we really need is to create these forms of media where people are actually telling their own stories.
Who doesn't want to be on the radio? Who doesn't? Or listen.
You're tuned to DIY Portland, KBOO's monthly show about revolutionary do-it-yourself projects. I'm your host, Julie Sabatier, and this month the show is in Woodburn, Oregon, where we're listening in on a radio barn raising. Workers, families, and community organizers gathered in Woodburn in August to help build a low-power radio station for Pineros y Campesinos Unidos de Noroeste, or PECUN, the Tree Pickers and Farm Workers Union. PECUN's mission is to offer support and fight for the rights of the employees of the Willamette Valley's many farms.
Yeah, well, you know, the radio station is going to be a tool to organize farm workers.
That's Ramon Ramirez, president of PECUN.
You know, it's a way that that we could directly inform farm workers about, you know, a number of issues, but also use it to mobilize and build political consciousness. Radio, we have found, is really important in communication during the marches for immigrant rights, and where millions and millions of people were mobilized. You know, the radio was used to mobilize them. So we understand the power.
He emphasized that the radio station will be just one piece of a larger, comprehensive vision of community organizing.
We're doing labor organizing in the fields. We got a worker center. We got housing. We're organizing women. We're organizing youth. We have 2 youth organizations. We helped found the statewide Immigrant Rights Coalition in Causa. We have another coalition that's working on education reform, you know, No Child Left Behind, called the Salem Kaiser Coalition for Equality. So we're building a movement here. We have about 9 or 10 organizations where we come together on a monthly basis. We call it Capaces, where we're building consistently leadership and addressing issues so that, you know, so that we're training ourselves to become stronger organizers. We've talked about issues like sexism, around domestic violence, around issues challenging like Latinos, youth, education issues, things like that. And trying to instill people principles of our movement so that they become stronger leaders and set the example for the rest of the community. You know, this is what the labor union used to do back in the 20s and 30s, right? They developed a community labor union where they integrated like community as much as they could, because when the big companies like in Chicago and Philadelphia wanted to like break the strikes, the workers already had their, you know, all the immigrants organized, the Italians, the Germans, the Slavs, the Polish, into community unions, right? So we're just taking a chapter of the labor movement and reapplying it.
Picun has enlisted the help of the Prometheus Radio Project in getting their low-power station off the ground. The Prometheus Radio Project is a Philadelphia-based organization which was started by radio pirates to lobby for changes in the law that would allow for greater access to low-power licenses. Now they travel the country and the world, galvanizing communities via their radio barn raisings. Here's one of Prometheus's founders, Petri Dish.
Hi.
And
always a pleasure to be on KBOO. What I do is media reform work. And, you know, there's a part of me that would really rather be, I don't know, like some kind of a brick-throwing anarchist or something, you know. But I actually feel like I serve the movement against capital and against, you know, the kind of government that we have much better by by making these like piddly little reforms in the media, the governance of media that allows broader participation. Because I think that whereas governments and corporations in old times ruled through brute force, now more and more elites rule through manipulation of media, manipulation of public opinion. And so so long as that is left undisturbed, it doesn't matter how many bricks you throw through how many bank windows, it's not going to change you know, the social relationships and the way people think about things, because they just don't have other ways of thinking about things.
I asked Petri Dish to tell me about his unusual name.
When I started a pirate station with a couple of my friends, we all took code names because we just didn't want to get caught. I called myself Petri Dish. My girlfriend was Millie Watt. You know, another guy was Noah Vale. My favorite was this one, Melissa. She was Bertha Venus, and so we all had a name like that. And I just decided to keep mine because, well, I guess in some ways because what we started with the pirate station hasn't really been finished. We wanted to build a community radio station that could serve our community, and you know, Clear Channel could own 1,200 radio stations, and we couldn't own any. And so I don't know. Even though you could probably figure out my real name pretty easily, I decided to keep the pirate name, and just to sort of symbolize that the struggle isn't over.
Putting together a radio station in the course of a weekend may not be the most efficient thing in the world, but according to Petri and the rest of the Prometheus folks, it's a great way to mobilize and inspire people to be part of the media movement. Sakura Saunders is on the Prometheus board of directors.
We are teaching people not only how to make how to make cables, how to solder their own, 1/8" to XLR cables and things like that, but we're doing screen printing workshops, and it's all about making technology less intimidating and just demystifying it for people. It's just amazing what people are capable of if they just try and aren't afraid of it.
In Picun's backyard, People worked around the clock to build and wire the studio inside an old house.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is, see that little screw? Tighten that down.
That's Megan Sheehan, a Prometheus volunteer, teaching Shizuko Hashimuro how to solder cable. Here's Shizuko.
We're so taught that experts know how to do stuff, and like normal people like don't know what to do with wires. That's why stuff's so expensive, because folks have like a monopoly on knowledge or something like that. So if you figure out how to do it for yourself, you find that like life is much cheaper. And it's very sexy too, because I'm holding a very hot thing and metal and danger and very cool. To me anyway.
Most of this work is done by volunteers like Larry Kleinman.
This is my place in life, as I know it. I work here at Pacun.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And I've been the person who's been coordinating the construction project. So before, even way back in the beginning of this. And since I know a lot of the details and I know a lot of the tools and supplies that we have, I've been sort of the dispatcher here at the radio headquarters.
Meanwhile, at the nearby community college, people attended workshops on everything from FCC laws to digital editing to fundraising and media reform. Prometheus volunteer Kate Coyer explains the idea behind the classroom experience.
To me, one of the things that's really great about the barn raising is that kind of each one teach one philosophy. So when I think about DIY, I kind of think about that, which is about collaboration and about sharing skills and kind of breaking down that barrier between expert and learner. You're not going to have proficient digital editors that are making, complex 3-minute news stories, after an hour and a half of training. But that's okay, because you're getting people familiar with it. You're breaking down that barrier, that first barrier to entry, because they're in it with a bunch of other people that are just as new to it as they are. And so getting over that hurdle and getting over that comfort level and building the confidence that, yeah, I can do this. This isn't that hard. Look at all these other people. They're doing it, and having that support. And then they can go home and practice. They can come back to another training that the station will do, that maybe KBOO will do with them. And, it's a continuing process, but you got to make a start. And I think it's a great way to start.
Some people came to the workshops with a wealth of radio knowledge and experience, while others were making their very first recordings. Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Wow.
If you're doing a two-way interview, what I call a stand-up, you have the mic very few inches from your voice, and then it'll be like that.
Right. You want to make sure that you don't hold it down here, because then, see, you hear that in your headphones?
So if I were to do it, I'd hold it like right here.
Mm-hmm. And then hold it like that, yeah.
Cool. Wow.
Communication at the event was primarily in Spanish. Petri Dish made an effort to practice his Spanish language skills as much as possible.
With Prometheus we're never quite content to do the same thing twice, and we've had 10 incredible events where we build a radio station in the course of the weekend, and each time we try to make it a little more challenging somehow by trying to do more things. We added to do a radio play was one thing that we added, and one time we added to do a wireless network at the same time. And with this one, we're trying to do it bilingually, even though mi español es patético, no es en hecho suficiente para hablar con todas las personas. I've been practicing for a while to try to be ready to pull this off, and it's been very motivating for me. One thing I learned when I went outside the United States, I went to the AMARC conference, the World Association of Community Broadcasters, and it was really kind of my first time out of the United States, and there were a lot of people there. Almost everyone spoke 3 or 4 languages. And I would walk into a room and everyone would be like, oh, there's the American. I guess we all have to speak English now. But then I would see other people, and they would just go from French to Spanish to Italian to Arabic, and just effortlessly, and have these conversations in many languages, and people knew them all. And I just really I noticed that default to English, and what I really didn't want to have happen at this conference was for us to throw this barn-raising event for a farm workers organization, but then as a result of all the visitors, we end up in the default to English just because one person in the room only speaks English, and so everybody tries, even if the farm workers are not so comfortable in it.
Workshops were mostly conducted in Spanish with an English translator. Live translation of speeches and announcements were provided for us gringos by a very small radio transmitter broadcasting on site.
It was very important to me to build the translation system because I felt that for a few $100s we really could create a system where we could actually organize across language with a lot of effort and a lot of hard work, but I knew it would take dozens of translators to pull this off, and I had no idea where any of them would come from, but I had the faith that if enough people heard that a bunch of volunteers were trying to build a radio station with a bunch of campesinos, and we really needed the help with translation to make everyone really come together and be able to communicate effectively, I just took sort of the leap of faith in our movement and our in people's hearts that they would do it, and I'm glad I did. I was certainly nervous about the system because it would be so easy to the little radios are a little pokey and the transmitters are kind of cheap and a little hard to control or whatever, but I am very excited that it seemed to work pretty well, and I think with a few improvements, at this point we could make they sell translation systems for many thousands of dollars, and they're beyond the reach of most organizations, but I think that we could make a translation system that for a quarter of that would really serve well enough for social justice groups. So that was an important experiment for us here.
When it's all up and running, the station will broadcast in multiple languages. Adrián Valladares Carranza, KPCN's startup coordinator, explains.
And also another special thing about the program that we're going to have a KPCN is the indigenous section of it, which I think is unique because there is a lot of there's a long story about how people from Oaxaca come here and they speak Purépecha or Zapoteco Alto y Bajo, and when they come in here and speak on that language, sometimes they don't even speak Spanish or English. So they have two languages more to bridge to actually do something, and so it has become I think a challenge for us to really reach to them and tell them what's going on, what kind of rights they have. So we will have a unique section of indigenous programming to educate them, to give them the right information, the right places to go and get benefits. So that's one of the many things that we can do with the unique section of KPCN, the programming for indigenous people from Mexico.
Adrián says he's also looking forward to diverse musical programming on KPCN.
One of the things about the Mexican culture here in the United States is that it has been overburned. The Mexican want to hear banda, corridos, and things like that. Like La Pantera, KWBY, here in Woodburn, they always play the music, and people are tired of that, to always have that, no more radio stations where they can hear salsa, rock, classic music, folk, boleros, which is classical music in Mexico that, we hardly hear over here.
The station will have a small staff of 2, a tech person and someone to coordinate volunteers and programming. Adrián will be around to help them until December. Picun hired him in June to be the liaison between the union, Prometheus, and KBOO.
I didn't know it was going to be this much work, but you know what? I love Picun, I love the movement, I love the way we're doing things. I decided to put a lot more love than to think about this as work. So it became, it became more into, I'm doing this because I really want to, not because I'm getting paid. I'm really proud to be part of this. It's just, extremely proud just to be with these people and learn from Prometheus Radio Project, learning from Petrie, Hannah, Andy, all of them. Oh my goodness, it was a blessing, and I think I'm really proud to work with them. And to all of you, I mean, actually all of you that are here, is just such a great feeling. And
among the many things Prometheus is looking to change is the nature of work and people's attitudes toward doing work. Here's Petri Dish again.
So many people have such crummy jobs in this world, and they spend all their time, just trying to serve the bosses who serve the stockholders and the returns, and so they do things in ways that are dumb or they have no control over. And we kind of have this sort of strange cultural idea about leisure versus work, and like leisure is what you want and work is what you have to do, and kind of sucks, but you do it because you have to pay the bills. And one of the things that we try to capture in the barn raising is that work is actually, I enjoy work much more than leisure. Sitting on the beach, like getting sand in my feet or whatever, like, so what, But building a radio station with a campesino organization, I mean, that's amazing, and it's really thrilling. And we try to recapture that in that there is another way of doing work that's self-directed, that is empowering for people, and that people, without necessarily having bosses per se, I mean, certainly people take leadership roles, but without bosses, people like to work. People like to do hard work that's rewarding, that they believe in.
People came from all over the country to take part in the radio barn raising. KBOO is the closest full-power community station to Woodburn, and they sent a large contingency down for the event. Here's KBOO programmer and board member Cherie Blackfeather.
I think it's good for people who come from a very established community radio station to get that whole energy rush of what it's like to start from the beginning. And it is very exciting, we complain about our radio station, things don't work right, this, that, and the other thing, and it's kind of fun to start from the ground up, with some folks that are very excited to, start a radio station, and the energy's really high, and it's a reminder of why we're doing it, It's like, because you can just take it for granted, oh yeah, KBOO, but really, we're part of a global movement for people's access to the airwaves. And I think being at these smaller grassroots events is a great reminder of what it's all about.
In addition to numerous airport runs and one emergency tofu procurement mission, KBOO volunteer coordinator Ani Haynes made sure people had a place to relax and take a break.
It's important to take care of yourself even as you're having fun and doing good work, because otherwise you get cranky and less effective. So we're here to make sure people take care of themselves.
Hundreds of people turned out for the barn raising, more than expected, in fact. Picun still managed to house and feed everyone, but it took a lot of work and cooperation. The Union Hall kitchen was the beating heart of this community organizing effort.
I'm Laura Ciordi. I work for Farm Workers Housing Development Corporation, and I'm the president of Voz Hispana, and I'm the coordinator for today's barn raising.
So what does it take to make food for all these people?
A lot of guts. I'm cutting the heart of the pineapple so I can blend it and put it in agua de piña that we're making for this evening.
The kitchen crew turned out amazing food 3 times a day, often improvising when the right ingredients weren't available. Much like the building and learning parts of the project, people worked with what they had and made something better than they thought possible. And they seemed to have a good time doing it.
It's a bit hectic at this point. This is the point where everyone gets a bit nervous and everyone's running around, but I'm sure it'll all come together. It always does.
That's Josh Marcus, who was working at the transmitter site out by Woodburn's water tower.
I'm pretty much a computer geek in the service of community radio. So I've been testing and setting up the little computer devices we're going to use to encode the analog audio signal to digital, just like a web stream you might play on your computer. We are building the studio to transmitter link. We are using commercial wireless internet to broadcast the audio signal from the studio over here to the water tower. Right now we have set up an antenna on the studio, and now we are trying to build a mast to mount an antenna here on this little shack near the water tower. So there's going to be an antenna on top of the shack that will receive the wireless internet, just like your wireless internet at home, and then the digital internet signal will travel down into the shack where the decoder will be, which will send the audio right to the transmitter. The transmitter is in this little building, this little shack here, and then the RF signal from the transmitter will go all the way up the water tower to the antenna on the top.
Whether they were wiring the transmitter, building the studio, or creating recorded pieces, everyone was diligently working towards the first ceremonial broadcast at 6 p.m. on Sunday. People began gathering under the main tent as dancers and drummers performed a traditional indigenous ceremony. Adrienne made sure we all knew how to count down from 20 in Spanish.
And I want you to understand, we're going to count 20 seconds, and then after the 20 seconds is up, we have to do a little synchronization with the people over there. So what I would like to happen is for everyone to say, "Si se puede." Si, hold on. All right, well, yeah, we like that one. So you're going to say, "Si se puede, si se puede, si se puede" 3 times, and then "Ya se pudo, and "Ya se pudo" 3 times. All right? And that's going to be the very first thing, and then after that, I'm going to hand the mic to Ramon Ramirez, which is the president of PECUN, and then we'll continue on from there. How's that? You like that one, or we should change it? How's that? Okay, so when it comes closer to the time, we'll talk about, I'll let you know, we'll start the countdown together, and just wait for it, okay?
That was a story produced, mixed, and recorded by Portland-based radio producer Julie Sabatier. Special thanks to Eduardo de Landeros Thier. That brings us to the end of our special programming to celebrate Cesar Chavez Day. These speeches and more can be found by going to KBOO.FM and searching for Cesar Chavez. This is KBOO 90.7 FM. Your investment in community radio can go with a planned gift to KBOO. Consider adding KBOO to your will, or add KBOO as a beneficiary to your insurance and bank accounts. You can change your mind anytime if your circumstances change, but recognizing KBOO along with your family and friends in your legacy giving is a powerful commitment to media justice. Let us know if you could add KBOO to your plans. We'd like to thank you for your considerate future gift. Contact Becky Myers at 503-231-8032 or email development@kboo.org to notify us of your plans.
Yo. Hey, this is LeVar Howard over here at OSP, and I'm a part of the Uhuru Salsa Cultural Club. And I just want to remind everybody, check us out, April 10th, Prison Pipeline.
Hey, this is Harold. We held our annual talent show here at OSP. What you're going to hear is you're going to hear an eclectic sound of music. You're going to hear some acoustic. You're going to hear some rap. You're going to hear some fun times. You're going to hear some people do some things close to their heart. And you're going to hear some things to ride to and have a good time to. So it's going to be on Prison Pipeline, April 10th, 6:30 p.m.
Prototype, call it the volume 1, call it the overnight, call it what you want to call it. I can't call it wrong or right, man, it's on tight. It's a prototype testing 1, 2, 3, man.
KBOO Community Radio is a proud co-sponsor of Thirsty City, a monthly beat and rap night at the No in Portland. On Saturday, April 1st, Thirsty City hosts Los Angeles-based Future Funk aficionados Devin Hu and Zachy Force, along with Thodo Lane and Wood Ox. The homie Northern Draw will also be DJing. Again, that's Thirsty City at the No, 3728 Northeast Sandy Boulevard in Portland. This is a 21 and up thing, so don't bring your kids. More information can be found at KBOO.FM on the right side of the homepage under community events.